Okay, now I've actually clicked the button. So I don't have a whole lot to report for this week. As members know, that the mayor's budget was released last week. We are still working with CFO to finalize exactly what it means for us. But as members know, the hearing for our agency is next Tuesday. So please do be watching your inboxes for copy and of the draft testimony that we will be writing as soon as we are clear on exactly what is in the mayor's budget for us. But we'll try to get it out to you as quickly as possible so you have time to review and provide any suggestions and items for that. And in the meantime, we will also be, as I noted in previous communications, we'll be providing you with some talking points to check in with your members of council as well as with the at-large members about our budget and about the needs of the agency. So please let me know if there's any questions on those when you get them. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Members, we are now going to turn it over to our colleagues from OSSE, Justin Tooley, Elizabeth Roth, and Siobhan Gibson from OSSE. And they're here tonight to continue their discussions and to update us on their work around educator preparation programs. And so I am going to turn it over to Justin, who I believe is going to kick us off.
Sure. So thank you for having us tonight. We're actually making two presentations this evening. So first will be Siobhan and Elizabeth to talk about teacher prep. I don't really have a lot to do with that tonight because, yay, they can do it. And then Shauna will join us here a little bit later after that to talk about our ESER State Plan. So go ahead, Elizabeth and Siobhan.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having us. We are excited to be here, and I am particularly excited to talk to you about a topic that is both personally and professionally near and dear to my heart, teacher development. As a career-long educator who spent most of my career actually leading teachers rather than being a teacher, this topic really is of interest to me because I find it vitally important to the stability of our school system and to the growth of our young people here in the district. During our brief time with you this afternoon, we'd like to share with you a theory of action for our pre-service teacher development as it relates to the overview of the proposed EPP approval regulations and related standards. Next slide, please. Then we'd like to describe to you how the EPP approval process is designed to ensure that every DC student has a high quality teacher in front of them each and every day, and detail how the State Board of Education plays a role in the EPP approval process. Next slide, please. So as you will see in our theory of action, we put improved teacher practice at the center of our work. To achieve this, we need to strengthen the approval process for EPPs and ensure that there are robust individual and educator supports and maintain actionable educator workforce data. When we do these things well, we will see increased student achievement and positive life outcomes for our young people in the district. As a matter of notice, I just want to say what EPP stands for those that may not know. It stands for Educator Preparation Programs. We may use the terminology teacher preparation programs interchangeably. We do mean the same thing. Next slide, please. So with more than a dozen EPPs operating here in the district, we need to ensure that our program approval process is right-sized to fit the unique needs of the state. That term was intentionally used, such as DC. We also need to set clear standards for quality, which encourage struggling EPPs to improve or move out. We also have a duty to help the public identify programs that meet their needs and be flexible to ensure that we continue to have innovative pathways to teaching here in the district. Next slide, please. So I also want to do some ground setting around some legalese to share with you to ground us in the content for this evening. So the DC code states that educators employed by DC public schools must hold a license. The requirements for licensure are outlined in the DCMR, and DC Code also outlines that the State Board of Education has the important role of improving standards for accreditation and certification of teacher prep programs. Next slide, please. So where have we been and what have we been doing? We have consulted with national experts to gain an understanding of the national landscape around teacher preparation approval. We've held one-on-one conversations with each alternative route or institution, also known as AROI. We've hosted 3 engagement sessions for all EPPs. We've received lots of written feedback. We've released an advanced notice of public rulemaking and received public comment. And now we are drafting the notice of proposed rulemaking. If there are no questions for this ground setting at this point, I'd like to turn the conversation over to my colleague, Elizabeth Ross, the Director of Educator Quality and Effectiveness at ESEE, who will talk more specifically about ESEE's proposed EPP approval regulations.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
The code says that educators in public schools are to be licensed. And under that, it says this means educators in District of Columbia public schools. Why is it not charter schools too? It says educators in public schools to be licensed.
I believe we answered that question the last time. The code, the law outlines that requirement. Public charter schools, as a matter of law, are not required to be licensed. Also, in some of the charter codes, there are specific references to the autonomy of charter schools in the hiring of their teachers.
All right. I will move the conversation on to Elizabeth.
Thanks so much, Siobhan. It's great to be here again and to see everyone. As Siobhan shared, my name is Elizabeth Ross. I'm the Director of Educator Quality and Effectiveness at ESEE, and delighted to be working with Siobhan and the team on this project and to have an opportunity to speak with you here tonight. If we could have the next slide, please. I'm going to provide an overview of our proposed EPP approval process, which, as Siobhan shared, is really at the heart of what we do on our teaching and learning division at ESEE, setting the stage for what teachers need to know and be able to do in order to enter our DC classrooms. Educators can use their educator preparation to help meet DC's educator credentialing requirements, and ESEE is in a position to be able to approve educator preparation providers that are preparing educators eligible to earn a DC educator credential. Next slide, please. The lay of the land in DC is that we have 16 educator preparation providers across the city. They are split almost evenly between institutions of higher education and alternate route organizations and institutions. We believe that DC benefits from a variety of EPPs, both traditional programs such as those housed at American University and alternative route organizations and institutions such as those, for example, housed at KIPP DC or at New Leaders. And we've designed a regulatory package in order to enable both of these types of programs to flourish. Next slide, please. Our EPP approval regulations follow a sequence and order where they detail first our authority and purpose, then provide some general provisions and applicability, and then include an opportunity for our EPPs to demonstrate that they are meeting DC's demographic needs, but also our subject area needs, so that, for example, we can ensure that we are not approving multiple EPPs in one subject area where DC may have a surplus of educators and not enough EPPs in another area where DC may have an insufficient volume of educators who are prepared to meet our needs. We then detail the requirements that an EPP must meet in order to be approved to initially operate, and then the different approval statuses. We also provide some information about the circumstances under which an EPP may be denied, prohibited, suspended, and or revoked, as well as the process of administrative review that we will go under. Additionally, we are for the first time putting in place requirements that EPPs will provide us with data. And we also include information about prohibited activities and representations that EPPs will make, as well as the requirements for loss of state approval and voluntary closure. There are fees associated with EPP approval, and those are detailed in our proposed regulations. And there is also a provision for waivers, and finally a definitions section, so that it is clear that all parties who are reading our regulations, including the regulated entity, have an opportunity to understand what we mean when we are talking about certain different areas. Next slide, please. As I mentioned previously, we have two types of EPPs here in DC. We have our traditional education programs, as well as our alternative route organizations and institutions. One of our goals under this regulatory package is to ensure that we are developing a process that works for both traditional and alternative route programs, but that also helps establish a uniform standard, given that individuals who graduate from EPPs, either traditional or alternative route programs, are equally eligible to earn an OSSE educator credential, provided that they meet our other requirements. So in both cases, we are requiring that the educator preparation provider would seek approval by an overarching entity. In the case of our traditional preparation programs, that entity is the Council for Accreditation of Educator Preparation, or CAPE, which is a national accrediting body. In the case of our alternative route organization and institutions, we are providing that alternative route organizations and institutions that meet two criteria, and these are detailed on the asterisks on this slide, either that operate independently in DC or that demonstrate that 50% or more of their graduates are employed in DC LEAs, may be reviewed by OSSE. And then for the subject area programs, so for example, an elementary program operating in a DC EPP would be an example of a subject area program. They would either be reviewed by the Specialized Professional Association or the national recognition body of experts in that content area, or by OSSE using a uniform set of standards. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, one of the key components of our regulatory package about which we are most excited is the opportunities for our EPPs to demonstrate that they are meeting DC's needs. DC has defined its needs as ensuring that candidates and completers, those individuals who are enrolled and those individuals who complete an educator preparation program, reflect the racial and ethnic diversity of the student population in DC. They also will demonstrate under this needs assessment that candidates and completers are provided with coursework, practical experience, and have access to racially and ethnically diverse faculty, so that ultimately they are prepared to adapt instruction to meet the needs of all of our students, including students with diverse backgrounds and needs. Finally, we are interested in our educator preparation providers and subject area programs demonstrating that they are responsive to the database needs of our local workforce and attending to anticipated national regional needs for hard to staff schools and subject areas. Next slide, please. In the data transparency space, we're interested in ensuring that OSSE's data collection of educator preparation program data is stronger and more uniform. And so we are proposing collecting uniformly from each EPP candidate, program completer, and teacher certification area data, as well as pass rates on the licensing exams that OSSE has in place, the praxis exams, which are governed by the Educational Testing Service. We are also using our faculty and staff data collection to match our EPP data to teacher employment and placement outcomes, with a specific eye towards whether teachers graduating from certain programs are serving students of special populations, including students with disabilities and English learners. And finally, we are looking at how teachers perform once they graduate from their EPPs and are ultimately working in our DC LEAs. In our pilot year this spring, OSSE collected these data from each EPP and is in a position to, or is working now to provide each EPP with a unique pilot report. And we are clarifying in response to some of the stakeholder feedback that Siobhan shared that we received in regard to our advance notice of proposed rulemaking, that in future years, once these rules are final, we anticipate making these data publicly available. Next slide, please. In terms of our timeline, we can't do this work without you, and we are excited to make sure that you have all of the information that you need in order to support us. So last month, we met to provide a general overview of our work in the educator space. Tonight, we're here providing a deep dive on OSSE's approach to the approval process. In July, we intend to provide a deep dive on proposed accreditation standards. And ultimately, in late summer, early fall, State Board will be in a position to vote on approval standards. And the OSSE team will tee up a deep dive on educator data and educator PD, or professional development. Next slide, please. I'm now happy to take any questions that the State Board may have on the proposed EPP approval process. And as I shared in July, OSSE intends to provide a deep dive on EPP standards for State Board approval.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Members, if you have a question, please raise your hand and I'll call on you in the order that I see you. First up, we have Representative Weidenberg.
Hi, I am in the car, so hopefully this will work. Partly because I was in the car, I mainly heard the presentation, but not entirely. I think what you said is that each of these EPPs is judged. Is it based on how their students do? I miss it. How is the program judged? Sort of the last piece that you talked about.
Thanks so much for that question. The EPP is, in order to be approved to initially operate in DC and then to have that initial approval renewed, the EPP is held accountable to a set of standards, and those standards will be the topic of conversation during July's meeting. We intend to give a deep dive into those standards, and simultaneously, OSSE is in a position where we are collecting and preparing for EPPs individualized reports that include a number of different data elements. One of those data elements provides EPPs with information on how their graduates who remain in our DC LEA system are performing when they are in the classroom. Does that address your question?
Representative Weidenberg.
What is the form that report takes? In other words, is that a test score, a proficiency level, a growth score, observations? How do you determine how the students are doing in order to judge the program?
Thank you for that excellent question. There are two primary mechanisms that we are looking at in terms of the EPP reports. The first of which is the extent to which individuals who are enrolled in or graduating from the EPP are passing the praxis exams, which are the exams that OSSE requires in order to earn an educator credential. The second of which is the second data point that we are sharing with EPPs under the EPP report process is provides the EPP with information on how their graduates who are employed in DC LEAs are doing when they are in the classroom. And that measure is based on reporting that our LEAs do to OSSE. It's point in time reporting in October of every year under the faculty and staff data collection. Our LEAs report whether teachers are effective on the teacher evaluation system that the LEA operates. So LEAs in DC have an opportunity to operate different kinds of teacher evaluation systems and then what OSSI does is looks at those data for EPPs and looks at those data for EPP graduates who are employed at DC LEAs and shares them back with EPPs. Does that address your question?
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, I can't hear you, but I've been following the chat. So thank you very, very much. It sounds like every school is making its own determination about how to judge whether a teacher is effective, and then you use that.
At the LEA level, that is correct. Each LEA in DC is able to operate its own LEA teacher evaluation system.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Representative O'Leary.
Yes, I have a, I understand Justin has been hearing me ask this question forever, but I don't understand because OSSI is in charge of, or has an overview of the DCPS and the charters. And it sounds to me like theoretically, a charter school could have an entire faculty that had no licenses. Is that true? I'm just doing a hypothetical. I'm not trying to jump on charters at all. All right.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. So it is our general counsel's interpretation that the OSSI's authority in licensing applies to DC public schools rather than DC charter schools. Charter schools may elect to require to require that individuals meet certain requirements in order to be hired, but it is our general counsel's interpretation that that is beyond OSSI's authority.
That is amazing. Thank you.
Representative Sutter.
Thank you. So I want to thank you. This is really interesting, and I'm excited about the data collection piece around the data that OSSI will have to provide back to educator preparation programs to let them know sort of the efficacy of their program as measured by individual LEAs. I think there's all sorts of interesting ideas that may come out of that and ways that educator preparation programs might use that. But I wanted to just clarify something that Dr. O'Leary's been asking about. So for instance, in your list of alternative providers, KIPP is a charter LEA that runs an educator preparation program. That is different than the licensure program. So KIPP has the ability to prepare educators that could be eligible for licenses that would, they might pursue a license and continue to work at KIPP. They might pursue a license and elect to work at DCPS, but this is about their preparation. So this is the education prior to receiving or applying for licensure, correct?
That's exactly right. So KIPP, Capital Teaching Residency, is an educator preparation provider, and their graduates, because they are currently an approved educator preparation provider, are provided they meet certain other requirements in order to earn an OSSI educator credential, are eligible for an OSSI educator credential by virtue of the fact that they have gone to an approved educator preparation provider in DC.
Got it. Okay. That's a helpful distinction because I know when I moved to the district back in 2006, I had my California teaching credential. I had a license in California. I worked at KIPP, who at the time did not require that I be licensed. So I never pursued a DC licensure. But it's interesting to keep track of the difference between the licensure and the preparation programs. And this is about preparation programs that prepare a teacher to be eligible for licensure. So helping me keep that straight by saying it out loud is great. Thank you so much.
Members, I am not seeing any other questions. Representative Thompson.
I have a comment and a question. I don't think Representative O'Leary is confused. I think what he's pointing out is that for him, it's actually astounding to have a requirement to have guidelines that do not require teachers to be licensed. I think that's what I hear from him. And I mean, and I understand it. Like, you can graduate from, I don't know, Harvard Law, and never take the bar. So you never get to practice law in the courtroom. That's a thing. And I think that's where Representative O'Leary is coming from. I guess my question would be, I'd be curious. So like, if I was a parent, trying to understand if my child's teacher was effective or not. And let's say they have teachers in multiple LEAs. Are there, from OSSE's point of view, are there any shared definitions for, I don't know, like, how would you help a parent understand, like, what does it mean to be effective, given each LEA determines that through their own evaluation process?
Thanks so much for that excellent question. I really appreciate it. I think for a parent with a child enrolled in multiple LEAs, in order to determine how each LEA determines whether a teacher is effective, that parent would be in a position where they had an opportunity to talk to each LEA about what that determination, how that determination is made, and what that determination looks like for a parent with a child in multiple schools within one LEA. That determination would be made relatively uniformly, depending on the LEA and the system that they were using.
But given we place so much onus on families to navigate and be kind of arbiters of choice in the system, does OSSE have anything that, like, does OSSE does OSSE have anything that level sets for people? Like, I wonder, like, if we say that, like, people are making choices based on their children having a quality education, that is baked into our current system. But I don't know that we give people enough resources to really determine what quality looks like. And in this case, for educators, they are like the linchpin for the quality of instruction children actually receive. They're where the rubber meets the road. And so I guess I'm just curious, like, outside of me talking to my child's school, if there's anything that OSSE, I guess, provides to help, like how does the standard setting happen? Like, what do we think of as good in the District of Columbia? And if I'm a parent, how, outside of just like how I feel or what I experience, which may or may not be the best thing, like, how do I know, like, who sets that floor,
Representative,
not even the ceiling? I don't.
Sure. Representative Thompson, thank you for the question and ongoing dialogue. Prior to, which predates me at OSSE in 2016, we led a group of LEAs that opted in to investigate and learn more about teacher evaluation. And it was through the DC Model Teacher Evaluation Pilot. So it was from school year 2015 and 16, 7 DC LEAs engaged in a year-long pilot in which we brought in experts to examine the implementation of various teacher evaluation systems. And on our website, I'm happy to put the link in. So we have engaged with LEAs around the components of an evaluation system, how you train leaders on using the evaluation system, training tools for teachers, and other communications tools. So that was a previous endeavor that predates my time at OSSE, but it was a level setting experience in which 7 LEAs engaged in.
That's helpful. I'll look forward to reviewing the link.
Representative Patterson.
I wanted to go back, excuse me, I wanted to go back, and this question is from Ms. Ross. I wanted to go back to, you said your general counsel did not feel it had the authority. Could you explain that out a little bit more for me? Because I know as a body, we're kind of looking at governance and things like that. And I just want to kind of understand how that interpretation, and if you can, how that interpretation came about, that OSSE does not have that authority when OSSE is supposed to be the state, education, over state education and the quality of it. Can you give me a little bit more how that about
I think what I'd like to propose is that we take this question back to our general counsel and follow up with the state board in writing so that we can be sure that we're speaking clearly on this issue.
Okay, I'll take that one. Okay, thank you.
But we did share, I also want to be clear here, it is not the case that there are many charter school teachers that are licensed. I think we've shared that data with the board, and I think that's something to also remember. Secondly, on the difference between licensure and effectiveness, I think that there's been robust conversation about determining teacher effectiveness. Licensure is not necessarily effective. You can get a license and not be that good. License is sort of the prerequisite knowledge, skills, and mindsets to enter the classroom. Now, hopefully, we would like to see a connection between effectiveness and the licensure requirements. But I think it's really important for us that I know everyone has a lot of thoughts regarding sort of teacher workforce type issues. But to level set on what we're doing today is a number of our teachers go to education preparation providers in the District of Columbia. What are the things that when they go through those programs, what's the expectation that they should walk out with after the completion of that preparation to come into the classroom on day one with a license? And how do we evaluate that? That is sort of the purpose of what this particular regulatory body and framework does. There are many other questions regarding sort of the effectiveness of teachers that are important, but I think it's important to just really focus on what this actual policy is meant to do and
address. Representative Thompson, is that a new question? Raise your hands. Yes, Representative Thompson.
Yeah, I agree. I'm clear. Licensure definitely does not necessarily equal effectiveness, but it's definitely a bar for entry, I think. And there are some challenges that come with certain bars to entry. Like I know that there's been a lot of conversation lately around teacher diversity, and there are questions around, licensure and if that is a bar for Black and Brown teachers. I'm curious if you all have learned anything around if there are any programs, whether they be traditional or alternative, that stand out in preparing teachers from different backgrounds, especially backgrounds that are reflective of our students across DC.
Thanks so much for that question. That's actually something that we intend this regulatory package to help us do, to better identify programs who are doing an exceptional job preparing educators and meeting the needs of our DC student body. So this is a question that once this regulatory package is finalized and in place, we anticipate being in a position to answer much more fully, because we will have access to the full suite of data and information from our educator preparation programs and providers.
I'll piggyback on that, Elizabeth. We also, through the EPP reports that Elizabeth mentioned earlier, are giving EPPs increased visibility around their own data metrics. Anecdotally, we have found that DC-based alternative programs are more diverse than traditional School of Education-based programs, with the obvious exception being Howard, because they are designed to serve Black students. So that's what we have found thus far, but we do hope that the EPP reports give EPPs data that is actionable for them to change recruitment patterns, to think about diversifying their own staff and meeting the needs of their own student bodies. So we're heavily attuned to that, Ms. Thompson.
Thank you.
And if
Sorry,
I was just going to address the question in the chat. Regarding the publication of EPP reports, it is our intent to propose in our notice of proposed rulemaking that OSSE would publish these data that we are collecting from EPPs subsequent to the finalization of the rules. So we intend to propose that in our NPRM.
Thank you. Representative O'Leary. You're muted. Representative O'Leary, you're muted.
I have a question about recertification, because all DCPS teachers have to recertify periodically. And so that gives you a picture of where they are as far as what they've done in their field. Is that off the charts for OSSE to, I know OSSE has a lot to do with recertification for DCPS teachers. Do y'all have any kind of control over the charter school teachers? Do they have to recertify?
Thank you for that excellent question. So any charter teacher that holds an initial credential and is seeking to upgrade that credential to a standard credential because the initial credential is non-renewable, or that holds a standard credential, which is renewable, that they are seeking to recertify, may apply to OSSE for educator credential renewal, as well as any DCPS educator. But just as in the space of earning an initial credential or earning a standard credential, OSSE maintains that requirement for DCPS.
Okay, my
So
question
a charter
was,
school teacher
do charter school teachers have to recertify?
A charter school teacher may elect to recertify a credential that they currently hold.
But there isn't any control over that.
But OSSE does not maintain that requirement for a charter school.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing other questions. I do have a few super technical questions, so I will go through these rapid fire. I'm looking at this list of institutions of higher education versus alternate route organizations. Why would a Georgetown, for instance, fall under the alternate route versus where it seems like the other universities are in the other category?
Yeah, what an excellent question. Thank you for the opportunity to shed some light on this. One of the distinguishing characteristics of an alternate route organization and institution is that a candidate who is enrolled in that institution is simultaneously serving as the teacher of record in a DCLEA. And so at Georgetown is classified as an alternate route organization or institution because although it is housed in what we would consider to be a traditional institution of higher education, its candidates are serving as a teacher of record while they are simultaneously pursuing their teacher education.
Got it. Super helpful. Another question, as I also about the alternate route organization. So Teach for America, for instance, partners, actually Representative Sutter's explanation was very clarifying for me. So thank you for that. So Teach for America would do the preparation on the front end and then often is partnered with a university. And I believe here in DC, they're partnered with Johns Hopkins, I believe. Will that partnership with a university influence whether or not they meet the credentials for EPP, or does that not matter?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. So as part of approving the program to operate, OSSE is interested in looking at how the program conducts what its programmatic requirements are in order for an individual to graduate and to graduate from that program and be eligible for an OSSE educator credential. So in the case of Teach for America, what OSSE is looking at are Teach for America's program requirements, some of which they may meet through partnerships with other universities. But what OSSE would be approving to operate in DC would be Teach for America's entire program, which includes, in the case of Teach for America in particular, includes a partnership with a university as well as specific programming that Teach for America offers.
Got it. You answered my question around publicizing the EPP reports. So thank you for that. And then the last question I had was, we've had a lot of discussion, I'm channeling Representative Chang around the science of reading. It would strike me that given the two categories of EPPs, the more traditional routes at the universities versus the alternate routes, you might have different approaches to the science of reading. And I know we're going to talk about the standards next month. So feel free to table this if it's too soon, but like, how do you in the standards approval process account for different philosophical approaches to something like reading?
Thanks so much for that excellent question. So one of the distinctions I think that it is critical to make is that given the space, there is a set of standards that are governing educator preparation provider entry into the space. So an education preparation provider, for example, in the case of Teach for America, that would be Teach for America, and then a subject area program. And so that would be something like elementary education or special education. And the standards that we are seeking state board review and approval of are those institutional level, those educator preparation provider level standards. Those would not be as granular to, for example, include something that would be applicable to a set of programs, but not necessarily all programs. And so in the case of specific subject area programs, OSSE has proposed in our advance notice of proposed rulemaking holding all subject area programs to the same standards, putting them in a position where they are demonstrating to OSSE or to their national body of expertise, the Specialized Professional Association, that they are meeting those same uniform standards. And in that way, OSSE is working hard to take advantage of the expertise in the field, national expertise about what it means to prepare a teacher well, for example, in elementary education or special education, including looking at the science of reading in the case of those two programs. Does that answer your question? Please.
President Parker, may I follow up there?
1 second, let me just quick follow up there. So if I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying, it's possible that you all's view might be that two separate programs that have two different philosophies around a given content area may still meet a standard according to the standards that we're approving. Is that fair? So around like the science of reading approach, that might be this program's philosophy, but another program may not follow that same philosophy, but they may, according to the standards, meet expectations.
In terms of demonstrating that a program meets standards, what OSSE and the Specialized Professional Association are looking for is for the program to make a demonstration that it is meeting those standards. And there are, I think, you know, it is important that the standards establish a minimum bar for what an individual who graduates from this program should know and be able to do. And I think, you know, that is what the standards are designed to put in place. And so I hope that addresses your question.
I'm going to go to Representative Chang. I would just say next month when you all come back, it would be helpful for at least me, but I would imagine my colleagues to just dive a little deeper there and just clarify. But thank you.
Absolutely. Look forward to doing so.
Thank you, President Parker, and thank you so much, Ms. Ross. This is really helpful. I guess my question would be taking the reading instructor standards as an example, or credentials as an example, what the range of options are, right? So we have spoken with representatives from other state bodies, right, that have had different requirements, for example, for their reading instructors in terms of what training they need to receive before they teach. And I'm just curious for us here in DC, what you see as the viable options.
Yeah, thanks thanks for that question. So in DC, we are doing a lot of work under our comprehensive, to develop our comprehensive literacy plan under our federal Comprehensive Literacy State Development, or CLSD grant. And as part of that, our application, our approved application for that grant, which we're executing, creates a clear clarion vision for our state around the importance of scientifically based reading instruction and ensuring that our teachers know and are able to communicate to their students the science of reading, so that ultimately all children have an opportunity to learn to read.
May I follow up with you separately
Of
about
course.
that? Thank you so much.
Then Ms. Ross, I'm going to elevate Representative Wattenberg's question in the chat, or Representative Wattenberg, if you care to, you could do it yourself.
Am I on?
Yes.
Yes. So if I'm understanding this correctly, the okaying, so to speak, the approval of the content specific part of the educator provider standards is via some third party group. Is that correct? A specialized group?
Yeah, that is exactly right. So OSSE is bringing to the State Board of Education the provider level standards, but then the subject area standards, OSSE is proposing that for where national expertise in the form of a specialized professional association exists, that OSSE will take advantage of that national expertise and ensure that programs have the opportunity to be reviewed by that specialized body. And so what we are bringing to the state board are those provider level standards. Is that distinction clear?
I think so. We're going to be able to look at the standards next time. So this will become more concrete. Is that right?
That's exactly right. July session is a deep dive into these standards.
That will be very helpful. Let me ask you one follow-up on this, which is thinking of the professional specialized organization that is going to do the sign off, so to speak, on reading. What would that organization be? Do you know, or is it multiple different options, or?
Yeah, there are a number of different subject area programs for whom the science of reading is a critically important body of research to attend to, one of which, of course, is special education programs, of which we have a number operating here in DC. And in the case of special education programs, the Specialized Professional Association is the Counsel of Exceptional Children. Does that help as an example?
Yeah, no, that's, do you know what it would be in reading, or we're not there yet? You're not there yet.
So in the case of, I would love to defer this question for the conversation that we have with you and your team in July. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ross, for engaging in those questions. I believe now we're going to turn to Mr. Tooley and Superintendent Young for discussion around OSSE's application for or plans for the ESER state plan. So Superintendent Young, I believe I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sounds great. Thank you. Can you all hear me? Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I'm in a new space today. So thanks so much for having us today. And we are here to share information about the ESER state plan and provide context and information about what the requirements of this submission are to the U.S. Department of Education and the context for which OSSE is planning on sharing that information. So I'm first going to share a redux of some of the slides. If you can go to the next slide, of the mayor's proposed budget information. The entirety of the ESER state plan is actually not a line item budget of OSSE's federal funding. However, the contents of the information that we are talking about there have to do with the broad investments and strategy of the district in terms of educational recovery, which is a part of the budget overall, and which, as you know, was just presented last week. So I'm just going to go quickly through this to help provide context to some of the policies and investments that we will be talking about today. And this is from the presentation the mayor provided to the council last week. So if you go to the next slide, as you know, the financial impact of COVID-19 required us to make significant sacrifices as a city while also maintaining services that our residents expect and protecting our most vulnerable neighbors. And we took extraordinary steps across the district, as well as in the education agencies in OSSE, to reduce spending, access our reserve, and maximize the aid to respond to the pandemic and its negative impacts. And so therefore, in our 22 budget proposal, which does include both local and federal funding, including some overlaps with our ESSER funds, we're using these investments to provide recovery and growth opportunities with a focus on an equitable recovery. If you'll go to the next slide, we'll see in education an overview of the citywide investments in education. And that includes a 3.6 increase in the UPSFF with increased weights for English language learners and at-risk students, $8 million to expand school-based mental health services to all the remaining DC public and public charter schools, $10 million in additional grants to charter schools for reopening, $13 million in high impact tutoring, funding to provide students access to affordable bachelor's and associate's degrees, summer programming investments, and a significant number of amount of investment in high quality affordable childcare. We also are investing on the next slide, $29 million across the district to reimagine work-based learning in our high schools over the next 3 years. This is very exciting to us as we think about how we can use our local recovery and education-related recovery funds to really make large advancements in academic achievement and access for our students. We have here career exploration starting in middle school, and in high school, a suite of work-based learning opportunities, including an advanced technical center, which is a physical facility designed to provide training for high demand fields in our career technical education sphere, significant investments in work-based learning in the high school side, as well as summer youth employment and senior year internship investments. So as we begin on the next slides to talk about the ESSER State Plan, as you know, the district received approximately $600 million over 3 rounds of ESSER relief and recovery funding via the U.S. Department of Education. This $600 million is separate from the citywide investment in relief funds. This is directly for education, flowed through OSSE. 90%, as you know, of those funds went straight to LEAs, but there is a state set aside in each round of those funds of approximately 10%, which totals about $60 million for OSSE to make investments that benefit students across the district. These state set-asides are spent across multiple fiscal years, not only FY22, and you can see here a chart of how those have worked. All the ESSER 1 funding has already been spent or allocated on relief and recovery efforts, and for ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, nearly all the funding is allocated to the recovery priorities listed on the following slides. I'm going through the finances first, just to lay a groundwork of content. But again, the ESSER State Plan includes a significant amount of reflection on the priorities of the state for recovery and how we have already, it is a descriptive plan of how we intend to do this work. As OSSE requires for LEAs, the U.S. Department of Education is requiring of states a description of how states have supported relief and recovery efforts so far, and in what ways their investments will be strategic along with those aligned goals and evidence-based programs. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see how you've heard me say this both in this at the state board, as well as in other public hearings, including multiple hearings in front of the council and other public meetings. These are our 3 priorities for relief and recovery as we are working both on the programming and supports we are providing, as well as any financial investments. And so those include safe reopening, student and staff well-being, and accelerated learning. And examples of what those priorities are, and these are the priorities also that we've provided to the local education agencies for their required reopening plans. And this is also the framework around which we are focusing our technical assistance and supports to schools. But in terms of investments, we are planning investments, for example, on safe reopening, on training and technical assistance on indoor air quality, evaluation and outdoor learning models. For student and staff well-being, as I shared in some of our citywide strategic investments, will make significant investments in both new and expanded programming to support student and educator mental and behavioral health. And we will invest on the accelerated learning, which is our largest bucket of investments moving forward, in the foundations and to accelerate outcomes for our children in high quality curriculum, instruction, and programming to address the effects of interrupted instruction. So as background on our ESSER state plan, on the next slide, on April 21st, U.S. Department of Education provided states with a 43-question template for the state plans. That's the submission of the state plan is required to receive the remaining subsection of our statewide funding that will be distributed both to LEAs and through OSSE. And again, this plan is largely descriptive of the state's current status and needs and asks us to report back on what we have done to date and in what way that's been informed and will inform our strategies. So there's a number of questions that describe the state's current status and needs, how we have been supporting schools to safely reopen and sustain safe operation. A couple of questions on the coordination of ESSER funds and maximizing those funds in what other ways local and other related investments will be used, how the state is supporting our local education agencies to plan, supporting the educator workforce, monitoring and measuring progress, assurances and related data sharing that we've already that we have been providing throughout the year that they're requiring us to submit again. Again, the deadline for this plan is June 7th, and we are in the status is being completed as we speak. So as you know, there's a meaningful consultation requirement, which requires that the plan be informed, if you can go to the next slide, based on input that we have received from our stakeholders. And we have received stakeholder engagement and that is directly related to the investments we have talked about and will be talking about in the next few slides, directly from a number of groups over the past year and a half. This plan itself is a submission to document in what ways we've been supporting reopening and plan to do these investments. And we have spent a significant amount of time, as you know, over the past year and a half, conducting continuous feedback with stakeholders, including LEA leaders, advisory councils, citywide reopening survey and coordination with the DME focus groups, oversight hearings in which we've received and synthesized the feedback from public witnesses, state board public witnesses over the past year, and your feedback specifically. We've also been, over the past few weeks, if you've seen me or my colleagues in other of these venues, sharing the contents of the plan, including the framework we've just talked about today, in terms of our 3 framework priorities, in our learning loss hearings, in budget preview meetings, and in other settings. And we will share the final submitted plan with the public on the website. And we'll also, of course, continue to conduct significant engagement on the contents of the plan, as well as specific investments and other types of programming after the submission and as we implement. So I want to go now to talk about the types of potential strategic investments that we have referred to and will be referring to in the plan, as well as in what way they reflect this feedback. So first, of course, related to safe reopening. This is our single most important priority for all of us, is the health and safety of our children in school and our educators and adults in the buildings. And to enable our students to be with their educators in a safe building, particularly as we enter into the next year, if they have not already been able to be in the building this year. So we are investing in the support and establishment of safe and outdoor learning spaces and indoor air quality supports. For student and staff well-being, this was very intentionally the next step in our 3 top priorities for our supports of schools. We need our students and our staff to feel comfortable going back to school and to have communities and facilities and supports to be able to make that transition. So we are investing in the partnerships with the Department of Behavioral Health to expand the district's comprehensive school-based behavioral health system and expanding services to the remaining schools in the cohort. We're investing in the establishment of self-service platforms with on-demand wellness resources available to all educators in the district. We're enabling the expansion of a mobile team to reach youth in crisis across the city in partnership with DVH, and making available suicide prevention curricula and training for all public middle and high schools. And we're also planning on investing in supports to re-engage disengaged or underengaged youth, and bolster supports for transition into high school, and to create welcoming and trauma-informed environments. If we'll go to the next slide, we have another couple of slides here related to accelerated learning. And here specifically, there are a number of investments that we have heard specifically from and had many conversations with you all about, and in addition to our LEA leaders, advocates, and parents, et cetera. So first, high dosage and high intensity tutoring. OSSE will be using some of its state set aside, and will refer in the plan to our investment in high intensity tutoring as an evidence-based solution to support our students in accelerating their learning and filling any gaps that they may have had this year due to working from home or other impacts of COVID. We're also, as you know, have had multiple robust conversations about literacy, reading instruction, and curricula. And this is an area that we really feel that we can make a great citywide investment in a way that we may not have been able to do before. As you know, we have a multi-year literacy grant from the U.S. Department of Education, but we're also going to be using this investment to conduct a citywide audit of the current literacy curricula, provide professional development and training on the science of reading, making high quality literacy curricula for schools and LEAs available, and make comparable steps for math as well in terms of investment and making those things available to schools to uptake and potentially align with other tutoring efforts at the same time. But we also know, and this is something I know I've heard from a number of you, that we don't want recovery and return to school to only be about English and math, right? A well-rounded curriculum is part of what brings joy to our students and brings kids to school, and helps engage students, and also provides them with a diverse set of experiences. And we want to put our money where our mouth is there. So we intend to make grants to develop and implement coursework beyond math and reading that meet high standards and that allow for educators and students across our schools to be engaged in some of this curricular and instructional work and investment. We also expand access to science instruction and strengthen STEM educational pipelines. We're also going to invest in the outcomes of our students with disabilities and English language learners, with access to high quality professional learning and supports to support the academic achievement of students with disabilities, including micro-credentials for special education and general education teachers that we hope will lay the foundation of common knowledge to help advance all of our educators in working with those students. And also, as we've talked about before, we've had multiple conversations about how we know what students are learning and how important it is to know that, so we know what interventions and supports to provide them. So we'll be investing to improve the quality and effective use of formative and interim assessments by schools to better understand and track student progress. On the next slide, we'll follow up with a couple of other accelerated learning and then also some foundational investments. So we intend to invest in a parent resource center for students with disabilities to support families in navigating special education services in DC. This is in response to a large body of work in our strategic plan related to students with disabilities at OSSE, as well as parent feedback and feedback from our colleagues at the Ombudsman and Student Advocate as well. As well as teacher and leader development. We're making virtual coaching available, consultative supports to assist leaders in the design of strategies, and new professional development offerings focused on high need areas. Finally, we want to focus on using this funding that's available to us to really accelerate what the future of school can look like. We know that COVID has been incredibly challenging for all of us and our children and educators, but there may be some things that we have learned that work that we can use in a non-emergency setting to actually make school more impactful for students, particularly those at risk. So we're going to make some investments in infrastructure and policy frameworks for the future of high quality and flexible school models, such as dual enrollment, remote learning in certain circumstances where we found it to the most successful, and competency-based education. And again, finally, you know, we've had so many conversations with you and others about strengthening data quality and access. We've been very lucky that the mayor's budget this year allocates $4 million for OSSE's data capital infrastructure, but we'd also like to intend on using some of our ESSER set aside funding to help accelerate that advancement in state data systems, laying the groundwork for the collection of course level and academic data, expanding access to early childhood data, and technical assistance resources to build LEA capacity. So those are all investments that we think are very responsive to the feedback that we've been hearing and to evidence-based programming that we think has been demonstrated to make us to help our students succeed. So I'll pause there and answer any questions, technical or otherwise, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for that presentation, Superintendent. Members, questions, please raise your hands if you have them. Representative O'Leary.
I was trying to wait for other people.
I'm happy to go to Representative Sutter if you would.
No, that's all right. That's all right. Because I have several questions and they're kind of all over the place. I have in Ward 4, we have the secondary schools are all brand new as far as I'm concerned. They're 5 or 6 years is the oldest that they are. And there are a lot of elementary schools that have been renovated, but there are a couple that are going to be renovated this next year. And there's one that's going to be opening in the fall. But there are also elementary schools in the ward that are decrepit, to say the best. And I'm sure that's the same in a lot of the wards. Shouldn't those schools be primarily helped by this federal money? Shouldn't they be at the top of the list to make sure that they're safe? Because safety is the first thing that you mentioned. And those schools are not safe, weren't safe before the pandemic. And they're definitely not safe as far as the air quality. They have window units. We have one school that's only 5 years old. The HVAC system doesn't work at all. It's supposed to be renovated this summer. I'll believe it when I see it. But shouldn't the safety and shouldn't the buildings that need the help the most get the help first? And I have a couple of other questions too.
Sure, I think largely what you're talking about is DCPS capital investment. So I'll have to defer you to the DCPS capital and or budget hearing next week because I don't have the detail on the DCPS capital investments.
Well, let me ask you this question. Does OSSEE have any kind of, and it's the same question about certification. Does OSSEE, even though it's the office of the state superintendent, do you have any control over what the LEAs do?
I'm not sure what that question is, Fraser, but I'll tell you that for capital investments related to DCPS, including health and safety, they've made significant investments, but I'm not the person to speak to them because I'm not the chancellor of DCPS. And I'd refer you to the DCPS budget hearing if that's your question, because I'm just not qualified to answer the capital questions for DCPS.
Okay, no,
buildings. I know they've made significant investments in that. I'm just not the expert in answering them.
No, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, Shauna, for that one. I probably have something else that I got. In the survey, you mentioned that there were 12,000 families that answered the survey. Did I get that figure correct? It was on your slide.
I
It's
believe
been-
that's correct, related to the DME family survey that was conducted.
Okay, 12,000 families is, I don't know what percentage of the students that are served. Are those DCPS families or are those DCPS and charter families?
I'll have to get back to you on the detail of the survey, but this was a citywide survey, so it was not just a DCPS survey. It would have
Okay,
been solicited.
But 12,000 families is not even not a significant amount of families that we serve. And just to, was that an online survey?
I believe it was an online survey, yes.
Okay, let me go to the next thing. When you said that you're going to submit the plan on the website, I mean, we're talking the same thing that happened in last summer when all the information was put out to the families about what was going to happen with the opening or non-opening of schools. And it was sent out on computers. It was sent out on the internet. You're not reaching the majority of the people in this city by sending stuff out on the internet. Because if we were able to do that, then we could send out information to every single student that supposedly has a device, and they would get the information right away. Is there anything that's happening? And I know this is not your control, but is there anything that's happening with the bosses, and I'm using that as a gentle term, that is anybody thinking about how we're going to get information to the people? It'd be nice if everybody is watching our meeting right now and they would get the information from that, but that's not happening. And it's not happening on the internet either. And I have one more question.
I'm not sure. Sorry, the question was.
Well, you really have answered it, Sean. I understand that that's not your purview, but
Well, Fraser, I'll just say one thing. As it relates to the plans, for example, that the LEAs are required to create and communicate with their families, the guiding principles that OSSE put forward, which are on our website as well, articulated expectation that an LEA should be communicating in multiple pathways with their families in ways that are responsive to that family's need. And in some cases that may be internet, it may be text on your phone, for example, instead of the internet where you might need a device to log in. It may be flyers or mail. It may be it may be a phone call. And our LEAs are directed to be responsive to their communities, and that may look in different ways. And those plans are then required to be available in multiple modes, including on the website, because that is the most common way that families with any device at all could access that information in a common way that will be there forever, in addition to other ways that are meaningful for that community in a way that the LEA would collect and share.
Look, I appreciate what y'all are doing as far as trying to get the information out. I just know that as a teacher, that when we sent information home on paper with our students, sometimes it never got past the office. And when the school calls the homes, sometimes the phones are hung up before anybody answers the phone. And that I understand that I'm not trying to kill the messenger, all right? But the message itself, there's got to be a better way to get the messages out to the population. And
Representative O'Leary, I'm going to ask that you use the chat just for the sake of time. No worries. I'm going to move us on to Representative Sutter, but Representative O'Leary, feel free to use the chat, and we'll try to get an answer to you.
That's like what I'm talking about as far as messages. That's all right. Thank you, Shauna. I appreciate it.
Thanks, President Parker. Hi, Superintendent Young. Thanks for being here tonight. I have two questions. One is about the plans that you list at the end. How and when the public will find out how much is being allocated to each of those? You referenced the 39 million, but there are no dollar figures. So when will that information be available to the public?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're in the middle of finalizing some of that now, and in part that has to do with sort of contracting, procurement, and grant making in terms of scoping out the amounts of those things. And so that's one reason that we haven't published a line item. We anticipate that that will be coming, but maybe not all in one piece. So I'm happy to come back and share more as we have it. But in part, we're trying to scope out at scale and then be able to sort of contract, grant, procure in order to deliver that. There's some cases, for example, in terms of high intensity tutoring, in which I can say, for example, that that OSSE has committed 3 million of that set aside towards the broader amount that is allocated across the district. And so there's a couple of those things that I have numbers for, and I can come back to you on, and the rest we are working on pinning down and finalizing.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, I noticed the mayor mentions 41 million. And so if 3 of that is coming from OSSE, clearly the other 38 is coming from somewhere else.
Yeah, and I will say that it's an incredibly challenging task to articulate the budget this year. We're very lucky to have multiple sources of funding in a way that we do not usually. I mean, it's an unfortunate circumstance in that we are in a recovery mode, but in the sense that there is funding that is our local budget, our federal, our citywide ARP relief funds, and also the I will say like OSSE ARP, the OSSE relief funding. And we, in many cases that we've talked about today, we will be braiding them together. And so I acknowledge it is a challenge to explain, and I'll do my best, but you have to forgive me as we work through the numbers.
And it's also spread over a time horizon as well. So it's not all of the money is going to be in FY22. There's
That's right.
FY23 contributions, FY24, which also is another variable.
Yeah. Kudos to whichever budget wonk ends up visualizing this for people with the braiding and blending across multiple years. I fibbed. I actually have 2 more questions. So the second question is around the timeline. It was clearly a very tight timeline that the Department of Ed gave. I spoke yesterday with fellow NASB members from other states and asked how their states were engaging with them and the public. And I learned that several states requested extensions from the Department of Ed. So both North Carolina and Maryland and Colorado all made requests to extend the timeline they had for this so that they could better and more deeply engage with the public on this question. Is there a reason OSSE decided not to request an extension?
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, I think we felt like it was important to meet the deadline and to do our best to share, given that it was informed by we have already conducted a significant amount of engagement with our stakeholders over the past year and a half. And we felt that our framework, specifically for the priorities that we had previously articulated in our guiding principles and continuous education plans that were already available, as well as the common conversation that we had related to, informed by stakeholders and related to investments such as high intensity tutoring, felt that we were in the position to make those commitments now, informed by that feedback, and not delay also the receipt of the funds so that we could begin to distribute it to our LEAs.
Okay, thank you. And the last question has to do with the approach to engaging the public. Same conversation with NASB members yesterday. I asked about the continuing engagement process that their states were going to engage in, knowing that there's sort of an every 6 months requirement for LEAs in particular, that they engage with their stakeholders as part of this work. I'd love to know more about how you will frame that engagement for the public, because while I will acknowledge that this is a substantive amount of engagement that has happened, much of it happened before the public was aware of the enormous influx of federal rescue funds that were coming in. And so what folks may have been deeply concerned with, say, in a citywide reopening survey, may differ from how they're thinking about how they'd like the city to spend $39 million that is education specific over the next 4 years as their children are returning to buildings. So understand why you're doing it this way, given the desire to meet the timeline, but how will you engage the public in an ongoing way? And what is the substantive opportunity the public will have to shape any spending that happens of the public money?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think In many of these cases, these are projects that may not have been able to be achieved otherwise, and we're very excited that we're able to get them off the ground. I think you're talking about a couple of different requirements again. With LEAs related to the continuous update of those plans, we are requesting that happen and that their families be engaged, particularly where there are things in their plans that may change. And I think similarly to us, there are, that we consistently as an executive agency make changes or are scoping to our program or budgets. And we will continue to do so and share that based on feedback and as well as, sort of need as we move forward. And so we anticipate, for many of these programs, they will be conducted in collaboration with folks, and some will be, like I mentioned, sort of a public grant and contracting process that we will be soliciting feedback on. And similarly, many of these things are tied into the strategic goals that we have all agreed are important. So when we're talking about literacy, for example, we've already made, we are already engaged in a robust public conversation related to literacy, and we anticipate that will continue as we execute these programs.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think what I would just say as a final thought is the explicit nature with which you say to the public, we'd like to hear from you on how this aspect of the work on recovery is going, may hit differently and solicit different input than broader conversations, say, about how the state could support schools or how the state could support parents of students with disabilities. So I think just providing opportunities for the public to specifically provide input on the use of these rescue dollars may elicit some new things you may not have heard before. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you, President Parker.
Representative Thompson.
I'm excited that you all are here today to talk about this because it's something I've been harassing people about. Representative Sutter is in my head as far as the questions around the dollar allocations, in addition to just the timeline of engagement. When I think about, especially like the reopening surveys, that feels like an entire world ago. When we think about what people knew to be true, what they wanted, what they expected, just how much hope they had for returning to any sense of, I hate to use the term, but normalcy. So I don't know, and I guess which leads into the questions I have. I'd be curious, since there are multiple rounds of ESSER funds, if we could be provided with how we've used the first round of funds that we received. I've had people ask us, or like I can think of a couple of times where I've been in meetings and someone said, well, how have we used the recovery funding? And I have no idea. So I can understand the things that are still being bid out for contract, but I think it would be helpful to have some clarity around how we've spent funds thus far, and how that and where we're planning for future investment. So that's the first thing. I think second, I'd be curious to know with the previous engagement, where do we lift up the different priorities in the framework from which engagement? So like, is it parents that said they wanted high dosage tutoring, or did that come from one of the DME committees or somewhere else? Like I would be curious to know which stakeholder groups, what was elevated out of which stakeholder groups. As we say, we've heard these things from the public. That would be interesting to me. And if there's anything that's top of mind that seems like it came from a particular group, I'd be curious to hear that now. And then I would also want to know, like, what counts as the SBOE engagement. I will speak for myself in saying that I particularly do not feel that we've been engaged very much about this plan. And I say that as someone who has just had a lot of questions and was like, hey, fellow board members. And I know Representative Sutter has also been like, hey, fellow board members, we just need to know more about this. Like if we take seriously our position as representatives, just that part of it, we need to know more. And I don't know that I could tell you what you're pointing to when you say the SBOE has been engaged around this. Not that you all aren't good partners of ours, Not that we haven't been in conversation with you about reopening and recovery more broadly. But I don't know if I am clear on exactly which interactions you're pointing to as having informed this overview of a plan.
Sure, that's a lot of questions. So let me just try and go try and get to a couple of them, and please redirect me if it's helpful. So I think there's a couple of things. Broadly, again, the plan that is being requested by the U.S. Department of Education is not a spend plan for the funding. It's an articulation of in what way, most of the questions are articulation in what way the state has been supporting LEAs in the process of reopening, and in what has been, in what supports the state is providing, and in what ways they are providing that support to get reopened, and where priorities are for that work, both academic and sort of operational, and in what way we can provide data. So I think the engagement what we're talking about here relates to meaningful consultation, which means in what way the things in our plan are informed by feedback that we've heard. And so given that the plan was released at the very end of April and guidance was released after that, we've been working on articulating in what way, the plans that we have already, the priorities that we have had related to safe reopening, student and staff well-being, and accelerated learning, and in what way those are informed by feedback. Those are informed by feedback. Again, I don't have a one-to-one crosswalk for you. So I will say that broadly, the matter of safety in buildings and the flexibility and creativity that schools have in ensuring safety has been clearly a priority of pretty much every stakeholder we've talked to. And we've articulated the ways we've aligned our funding there. Student and staff well-being, similarly, we've heard significantly from schools, educators, parents about the mental health and well-being of people returning. And accelerated learning, similarly. I mean, I think there's a strategic set of decisions that have to be made when you have significant funding like this, related to, are you starting something completely new, right? Are we going to functionally rewrite our ESSA plan in this funding? And we chose to say no, right? We're not rewriting a state plan here. We are investing in the things that we have evidence and feedback to know are important. And so Ebony Rose, I wouldn't suggest to say that we have come on the Tuesday before prior and say that this is our engagement with you. I will say that the sum of our engagement over the past year has informed specifically some of the academic pieces that we have continued here, that we have had multiple conversations about: literacy and science of reading, well-rounded curriculum, assessments and transparency about data, teacher leader development. And those are all things that we have had strategic bases for and investments in, and we have chosen to continue to invest in those things that we know have common importance to us, to advance the things that we know work, meeting also the requirements of the U.S. Department of Education for evidence-based interventions, as well as accelerating things that may not have been able to be done before. And so that's the strategy that we're operating on, and the meaningful consultation that we've had with multiple stakeholders, you included, in the content of the work that we're doing to support LEAs, as well as specific kinds of investments.
Would it be fair to ask that at some point we are provided at least an update on what's been spent as far as ESSA funds so far?
So we have some of that information I can point to you for the council oversight, which does the oversight of the executive budgets, and we've provided some of that, and we can follow up with some of that information already related. And I've shared some of that in other public fora as well, related to how some of that has been spent, I think, in previous oversight or budget testimony, Justin, so we can follow up on that.
Yeah, I mean, and this is a place where I assume we could do better with our staff. It feels like me alone. I've been responding to council inquiries regarding the spending of this money through letters and testimony and things ad nauseum, and maybe that doesn't get from whomever I have to send it to the council to you. So that is a place where we can direct through our upcoming budget responses. We can provide you with that information. There's also the U.S. Department of Education, the reporting that we have to do to them. They have a kind of a dashboard of where ESSER funds are going. There's not very much on there. We've only had to make one reporting, and we did that back in, I think, March. But as that sort of ramps up and more reporting comes out, I think that will be a very helpful tool as well. There is some delay, but we also have been making a lot of disclosures along the way, and we'll make sure that we get those to you as well. We've also mentioned it in our testimony. We've appeared before the council a number of times related to learning loss, related to recovery, and in those testimonies we have spoken on.
Can I ask one more question? We don't have a timer, and so, I don't want to get in trouble. But so since we are submitting our plan on June 6th, and you all are doing the engagement on the back end, I guess maybe it's a two-part question. When should we expect something more concrete around what the public engagement looks like? Like the actual, where the rubber hits the road around this, what we should tell our constituents, what are the action items, right? Is my first question. And then second, do you all plan for any, if you heard something magical that we should totally do, I believe there are opportunities for you all to update and revise your plan. Is that correct?
Yeah, so again, the plan that's submitted to the U.S. Department of Education is not a line item spending plan for the agency's funds. So it describes in a couple of ways larger investments that we're making that are aligned to the strategies that we've articulated in terms of our reopening and support strategies. And so, in general, as OSSE's budget allows, we are always responsive to the needs of the community as we see and hear it. And there may well be flexibility over the next year or two or three to change and be responsive. That's, I think, always our responsibility to be responsive and to be efficient stewards of federal and local money.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, sorry, and maybe just to clarify, I understand that it's not a line item budget you're providing. I get that. But what I heard you all say was that you all chose to kind of double down on the areas of your ESSA plan that you may not have had the resources to, tackle quite as efficiently with some of these funds. And I do think that we're in a particularly unique time where we're learning a lot and where things are adjusting rather quickly. And so I would not be surprised if there's something that is elevated that rises to the level of like, this is a framework idea. Like when I feel like we float in education, the idea of reimagining education a lot. That's a pretty big standard. That's not the things that we already have thought about. And so I guess I'm curious, like what does the evolution look like? Like when we talk about engagement, what does it look like to be in conversation with the public, to move forward with like a shared understanding? Like I would like a clearer vision, I guess, of what the engagement conversation looks like. So, and maybe that's not something to be answered here, but I hope that clarifies that I'm not necessarily looking for like an accountability line item by line item. Did OSSE spend it this way? That's not the only question here.
Yeah, I appreciate that feedback, and I think it bears some consideration. So I think it would be helpful for us to go back and think about that a little bit. Particularly, like you said, I think there's going to be multiple conversations about recovery, and similarly to I think what Representative Sutter just said earlier. Is that, what we all thought 6 months ago isn't what we think now, and what we think 6 months from now isn't going to be what we think today. And so I think, Rep. Thompson, what you're saying makes a ton of sense. I don't think I have the entirety of like the continuous improvement cycle for the next 3 years on recovery mapped out in front of me, but I think I'd like to give it some thought. Think about what the most effective sort of strategies for engagement on that are and on what routine. Because I hear what you're saying. I don't think I have a full answer for it right now.
Thank you. Representative Wattenberg.
Hi, thank you, Superintendent, for being here. My question, I want to really focus in on trying to understand the high dosage tutoring. And this is sort of a problem when something becomes a slogan, it's sort of like, wow, what does this mean? And I know people have been talking about it. And initially it was really talked about, as I recall it, as sort of a summer intervention. And now it's sort of it feels very much like the main intervention. So I'm interested in what it is. And here's what I mean by that. Who's getting it? How are we determining who's getting it? What subjects is it in? How many minutes a day or a week is it? How many kids at a school are getting it? How long does it last? And so I'll start there, but also to what extent are LEAs doing it differently? What are the parameters that make it high dosage tutoring? I'll leave it at that.
So I can give some high level bullets on a bunch of those questions. And then I think this is another area where this is probably more conversation in a substantive way. If the board's interested in that, would make sense to come back to. So high intensity tutoring generally is considered one-on-one or 1 to no more than 4 adult to children tutoring that is based specifically on a child's sort of demonstrated needs as demonstrated by data or information about their academic needs in any subjects. And frequently that is English or math, but not always. And it is generally considered the highest sort of standard of that would be considered to happen during the school year, during the school day, or very school day adjacent. However, not all tutoring has to be during the school day. It can be over the summer or after school. And I'm sorry, I think I don't have my specific framework in front of me in the papers I brought with me today, but the framework for how the city's intending on spending this will be investments over the summer, investments in the organizations that produce and distribute and like the tutors, so the community-based organizations that are tutoring organizations, specific investments in schools and LEAs themselves that may be at the highest need, and investments particularly in the infrastructure and some foundational investments related to if we need to sort of seed invest in providers in areas that may not be sort of the highest availability. So for example, dual language tutoring or tutoring for specific subjects that may be high need of which there's not a lot, middle school math, secondary, et cetera. And well as we intend to invest in sort of back-end data and reporting infrastructure. And so the way that this is likely to work is that there will be a number of community-based organizations whose job it is to do tutoring programs that exist now will scale, and LEAs who have their own funding and or some particularly high need LEAs will get extra funding to bring together tutors with their students who are identified at the highest need or who are identified as wanting specific support. And that may well look different in different schools or LEAs, depending on demand, depending on the school setup, et cetera. And the intent is also to keep track of who's receiving what services so that over time, the district can see what's working and to make adjustments as we go along.
Thank you. That is helpful. Let me ask you this, in terms of the organizations that are getting the dollars, and I've seen a list at some point. So to what extent do you know, are those organizations under requirement? I mean, some of those organizations, when they typically do tutoring, are using nice people. They're not all using
certified people who know how to teach, let's say reading, or let's say math. To what extent is this about them hiring nice people, or are we talking about them hiring as tutors, well-trained tutors who really know how to teach a given subject to a given student?
Yeah, that's a great point, Ruth. And I think that first, there's been no funding that's been allocated already, that's been distributed yet, to my knowledge. So just as there are a number of these organizations that exist, but we have not awarded the funding yet, and that will be done through various contractual and procurement vehicles. Yes, you're right. The ideal is absolutely to have tutors who are trained, who in many cases, for example, an LEA may choose to compensate their own teachers to do this work, or their own school staff who are in some ways educators, paras, or instructional coaches, et cetera. And in other cases, we have high quality tutoring providers who have their own curricula and training when they recruit those folks. In other cases, there may be less high touch situations in which there may be less trained staff, but clearly for the highest impact and the highest standard aligned, you're right that you'd have someone trained with at minimum some training in instruction and delivery in their content area.
And is that when will we see what that piece of it looks like? Is that something that people are going to have to go look into the procurement documents, or at some point will somebody say, 80% of these teachers are going to be certified, or X% are going to be teachers hired in the schools? Do we, and I understand some of this is you and some of it is the LEA. And I guess part of what I'm trying to figure out is which is which and how we know.
I think honestly, I'm not trying to give you the question. We're just going to have to come back to you on that. I think that's the right question to ask. I think we should ask it again.
Okay.
I think that it is our intent to have that level of documentation and understanding, in part so that, like you said, we know what investments are working and we can course correct as we go. But we're in the process of doing the planning, doing the documentation, working with our LEAs, working with our CBOs right now. And so I just don't have the answer, but I agree with the question. I just don't have the answer right now.
And let me just say, so one piece of it is the qualifications, and clearly you understand what's being asked. And another piece is the frequency thing. I've heard people say in schools, I'm not saying this comes from you, I'm not saying this is anything more than rumor, frankly, but people are saying to me that the plan is that students are going to get, 2 45-minute sessions a week. And somebody else told me they're going to get 1 45-minute session a week. Now, I don't know, does that count as high dosage tutoring?
I believe it does. You're looking at least that level of interval, individualized a week. But I can go back and pull up our documented sort of like suggested standards for tutoring, and we can share those back with you. I don't want to misspeak. But
and I don't want to keep going at this.
I also think it's important to just level set on where we are. This particular influx of federal dollars is not very old. And our allocation, not very old. I think what we have heard consistently in many forums all over the city is that children have experienced significant learning loss over the course of the pandemic, and that they're going to need additional instructional time delivered by in school, out of school, to address those needs. I think what we're saying here is that as a concept, we're looking to invest in a tutoring system that will provide some of that additional instructional support time for kids that usually don't get it. This is something that a lot of wealthy people can go and access, but through this investment, hopefully, if we do it right, we can get it into the hands of kids that don't have those opportunities. We don't have a full implementation plan for this, it's only since April. I think all of these questions are reasonable. They're questions that I also ask all the time. But I think as a concept, we are looking to make sure that kids who have lost the most learning are getting the instructional time that they need when their daily school instruction might not be enough. I think that's a pretty significant undertaking for us to take. I think it's also a significant undertaking that we've heard that people want. Now, are there details? Yes. Will these details come across over the next 2 months, 4 months and sharpen? Yes. Hold us accountable for that. But I think that this is a very serious idea of making sure that we don't lose the gains that we've made over the past 4 or 5 years.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you very much. I agree. The details are to come, and I know we're all looking forward to them.
And if there are other proposals of how to increase instructional time outside of the regular school day, I think that we would be all open ears to hear them. But I think as a concept, we're going to have additional support resources and staff and people to work with our kids to provide them in some of that remedial help.
And let me say, I agree. I'm a big supporter of tutoring, intervention, and reading as soon as it's needed. And what I'm concerned about is that I'm not hearing that the tutoring is clearly going to be provided by the people who know the most after having given the appropriate assessments. But I don't want to take any more time. You're going to come back to us. We're.
And then another piece too is, on this engagement piece, I've heard from this body over the past so many months about the importance of literacy instruction and looking at curriculum and science of reading professional development. That's in this proposal. I think that that's something that everybody on this board should be very excited about. We have also seen article after article, interest after interest, hearing after hearing, public comment after public comment about the need to collect additional data on student transcripts and courses. That's in here. There's nothing more responsive to those. I don't know how we could possibly be even more responsive.
And my issue,
we've heard those consistently.
Representative.
I'm done.
Thank you. It is my understanding, Superintendent, that you have a hard stop. I do want to be mindful of that. Thank you for entertaining questions. This is what I'm going to propose. I do have a number of questions. I haven't been able to get to them. That we compile the remaining questions that we have and share them with you in order to get responses. Mr. Tooley or Justin, I'm not sure if you're able to stick around for a few more minutes to answer questions, or should we just handle them offline?
I think we have a budget hearing coming up. I think that this is going to come up consistently. I will, as soon as our performance oversight item, or excuse me, what season of year is it? Our budget oversight items go out to the council. I will make sure that John Paul gets a copy of those. I will also make sure I will go through and look for additional correspondence that we've sent to the council regarding ESER. I know that we've done that a couple times over the past couple of months. And make sure that you.
I know there were several things that Representative Thompson, Sutter, and I'm sure everybody would agree, and that they requested. And so, again, we will reach out with those things, namely around timeline, around the different and the itemized spending per investments in the slide. I would also say, I know some of this funding is broken up over several years. It will be interesting to see timelines associated with things. So for instance, when you talk about formative assessments, is that an investment this year? Or should we expect those investments to take place over the next few years? But again, want to respect your time. Thank you for being so generous. And we will reach out offline.
Thank you all. I really appreciate the feedback and thoughtfulness, and we look forward to continuing to talk about this, both in response to your questions and in coming meetings.
Thank you.
Good night.
Members, I would just say what I was hearing from many of the questions tonight is what I'm hearing from constituents, is what I'm hearing from the council, is that folk just want to know what is the plan. And while that's very easy for people to say and request, there does seem to be a desire for things to be laid out in a much more detailed fashion that it has been presented. And while I appreciate the OSSE teams sharing with us and going before council, I'm open to entertaining thoughts around how we might help facilitate that conversation for the public, because I have no less than 3 responses that I need to send out tonight around what is the plan that civic associations, ANCs are requesting And what, as Representative Thompson said earlier, I'm not sure I would be able to coherently respond and say what the plan is. And that is not by any means for the lack of the work and effort that I'm sure the OSSE team is putting in. I'm just not sure it's being done in the most efficient and effective way for the public. So again, maybe we could tackle that in new business. Representative Thompson, I'm going to come to you, but just ideas for how we might help facilitate that conversation for the public.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would like us to take some time as a board to level set around what we expect. I don't know, like it stuck out like a sore thumb to me to see that they literally listed the SBOE had been meaningfully engaged. And I don't know if we have a shared definition for what that means, because I don't have all the sense. I don't even know if it's common sense. I have a little bit of sense though. And typically when I meaningfully engage in something, I can at least tell you what I experienced, and I can tell you what I was supposed to take away from it. And the fact that I'm sitting here not able to do that for not just myself, but the people I represent is pretty unacceptable. When today is June 2nd and they're submitting this document on June 6th. Like, that doesn't sit well with my spirit. And so I do think, and I don't know if it's tonight, I don't know if it's offline, I don't know I don't have a recommendation for the forum, but as a body who engages with OSSE regularly, if we don't feel like we can adequately speak to what is happening, I would shudder to think what most of our constituents feel, are experiencing at this moment.
Yes, I echo that. Let's come back to it in new business. And by no means do I, yes, let's come to it in new business. How about that? All right, members, we're gonna switch gears and talk about the findings of our principal survey. You all should have received the report that came from our committee. Just as a reminder to the public, at the beginning of the year, we launched a committee, a time capped committee that would engage the public around school reopening broadly. The committee decided to focus on engaging principals, as that is a constituency within DC that we felt hadn't been heard from readily in many of the discussions. And we focused on producing a report that asked their opinions around how federal funding should be spent and had been spent up until that point. And you'll see some of the findings in our report. I'm not gonna read all of this, but I would like to, for those watching, just give a high level take of some of the key takeaways from our report. We heard from, I believe that number is 40% of principals across DCPS and charters, and almost all of the public charter school principals that we heard from had received their federal funds, as compared to only a third of DCPS principals at the time. Keep in mind that when this survey was conducted, several months ago. So that is not to say that they still have not yet received their funding. Most of the principals surveyed emphasized the need and desire to use the funding to hire more staff. We know that there has been a shift in that on the part of DCPS, which was well received. We also know that there was an emphasis around SEL supports, as well as technology and staffing resources for students to be able to engage in hybrid and/or virtual learning. Again, members, you have the survey report. I would love to also just give you some of the high level numbers, and then we're going to open it up for discussion. So on the page 2 of the report, you will see under methodology and participant information, of those surveyed, we had 40% 46% work in charter schools, 43% worked in DC or served in DCPS, 62% were women, 35% were men, 14% identified as Hispanic, 57% identified as white, 34% as Black, 6% as multiracial. And then in terms of the ward breakout, kudos to Vice President Gasoy. We had our highest response rate from Ward 1. Sadly, we had our lowest response rate from Ward 5, but you could also see the breakdown across the wards. So at this point, I'm going to open it up for discussion. But before we do, Representative Chang, is there anything you would like to add as co-chair of this committee?
Hey, everybody. No, thank you. That's a great summary.
Awesome. Cool. We're going to open it up for discussion. Any thoughts, reactions, or questions related to the principal survey report? Awesome. I am not seeing discussion. Feel free to reach out. What I would say, Representative Whitberg, is that a question?
Well, I want to have a conversation about this. I don't want it to go by because I think it's really important. And I will just say I have not fully read it. So I wonder if there's anything you could put forward to us about sort of the main, either the main findings of what people wanted or the things that were the most interesting to you. I mean, I'm sort of looking, I'm curious about the intensive tutoring. Anyway,
yes, I would say
I'm partly just being dilatory here while everybody gets their questions together.
No, that's fine. I also want to be mindful of time. The point and the purpose of the survey was to inform other stakeholders and our partners across DC government, so the DME, ESEE, et cetera. We have shared this report. And I think given the time lapse from when we administered the survey to now, the findings, while important, don't seem as timely. A few things I would highlight that was interesting to see, and it was great to see in the mayor's budget rollout, is the emphasis that we heard from principals around needed SEL supports, and the mayor's budgeting around mental health supports. I also saw in ESEE's presentation tonight that they were providing self-directed mental health supports for educators. That was going to be one of my questions around like what exactly that meant or looked like. So that is a highlight. A question that I personally still have, or that I have, is around like technology and access. We know that tech access as an issue has been an issue before the pandemic, during the pandemic. My concern, and we heard that also from principals. My concern is with the announcement that all students are going back into school buildings per the mayor's order, are we going to then put the tech access issue on the back burner? Because then it seems like it's a less pressing need. That's something that we should keep an eye on.
Can I make one comment on that, one response? Sure. Which is, and it also is my second round question, if we've gotten to it for ESEE and it's related, is, I mean, the elementary school kids won't have been vaccinated, and I don't think the sixth graders in middle school will have been vaccinated. So there is a whole issue, I think, around social distancing. So there's a space issue, sort of how that's all going to work. And so I don't understand it. So.
Representative O'Sullivan.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the report now. And one thing that was brought up in yesterday's Student Advisory Committee meeting, while it wasn't related to these funds, it was generally about funding. And a lot of students expressed concern about reports that their school were downsizing the number of librarians that they had. Because a lot of students were saying, like, if things were to be in person, a lot of students use the library as a space for like printing or just going there in generally. And already, like, librarians have to do a lot, and they're worried about, like, if you cut from 2 to 1, or what one student said, from 1 librarian to, I believe they, like, an assistant librarian, a change in staff, which would mean that basically the principal could fire the librarian whenever they wanted, I think. A lot of students were concerned about that because a lot of students rely on libraries, and librarians keep them going. And already some schools where there are a lot of kids, it just seems impossible for them to do the things that they need to do in their libraries during lunchtime, after school, whether it's a printer, because some kids don't have access to that at home. It is something that's very concerning. And similarly with downsizing teachers and staff in general, some students said they heard rumors that certain, like, arts departments and drama departments at some schools were being cut, and that was concerning for them. We plan on discussing it more in our next meeting next week, but it is something that I think students are paying attention to when they are hearing about it. It does concern them because they, you know, if we are going to be 100% capacity in person next year, you know, there are a lot of things that maybe leaders are taking for granted about what students rely on. So the staffing downsizes especially are very concerning.
Representative Sutter.
Thank you. One thing I noticed in the survey responses was in respect to how principals talked about spending funds. One of the responses notes that the most common places they would spend funds, and I've just lost it here. Yeah, mental and behavioral supports and high dosage tutoring were top ranked resources being made available for summer and school year 21-22, while outdoor learning and facility updates or maintenance were the least ranked resources. Since all of that came up in conversation tonight, a couple of thoughts come to mind that I think reflect back on our conversation with OSSE about their engagement and the timing of that engagement and how that informs the way people think about what they provide. So if I'm a principal and I'm not recommending outdoor education, I think there's a couple of ways that we as policymakers could interpret that. One is, I don't value it. I don't think it matters. Another is, given all the things before me and what is easily accessible, what is easy to slot into what I already do, how smooth I feel the process would be to access the funding and implement the solution, these are easier. This is much more complex. And I wonder how we're thinking about assisting our schools in implementing things that they may want to do, but which may require more capacity or new pathways to be able to do. So I know Representative Gasoy sent us all information about the Department of Energy and the Environment grants about outdoor learning. There's a lot of talk about outdoor, like money available from DCPS for outdoor learning. But if principals aren't feeling like they can access it for whatever reason, it's not going to happen. So I hope that we can think of ways to ask not just about what money is available, but also like, what's the support and assistance? What's the incentive? How are principals being nudged towards accessing these resources? Because what I'd hate to see is for all this funding to be out there and folks to say, look, nobody took it. I guess it wasn't that big a priority. Because I don't think that that's the case. I think there is just we've overloaded everyone in schools, asking them to take on a lot this year. There should be easier ways we can support this work going forward. And I wonder if there are ways the board could be supportive in that effort.
Representative Chang.
Thanks. Hey, so just want to first pick up on what Representative O'Sullivan mentioned around school librarians and their importance. Representative O'Leary, Wattenberg, and I were at the Washington Teachers Union rally earlier this afternoon, heard from several school librarians, and I think it reinvigorated my passion around why they're absolutely critical now. And I think it's wild that we're cutting what their latest figure was 27 school librarian positions, moving it from full-time to half-time, or moving it from to excising it completely. In the current climate, and in particular in relation to what we're seeing in this survey, right, where the number one ask was around mental behavioral supports and social emotional learning programming. And well, I'll quote the summary that our team made around the top two areas federal funds can help schools with, according to principals, were staffing and SEL supports, right? I think that school librarians play a lot of this role. And I just want to emphasize for everyone again that, you know, I think one of the pieces about the school librarians' roles that resonates most with me is that they don't grade their students. They're not testing them. And what they get to do is learn about, you know, Johnny's interests and encourage them to continue self-guided learning around that interest, right? And build a relationship with them in a way that only they can, I think. And so those pieces for me do fit together around school librarians. And I thank Representative O'Sullivan for raising that. Representative Sutter, I think your point and read on the survey results is also spot on, and I do think it in part answers at least a question around principal demand, right, for high dosage tutoring, and it does raise the question on what is the barrier for. Why was outdoor learning ranked last? I'm also very curious to follow up with folks and learn more about and how to read that, right? Is it in part also because that there's a prediction that the pandemic at this point is not necessarily going to be as much of a factor, and people saw outdoor learning not as a methodology, right, but rather as a workaround. And I think that, you know, a lot of the parents who've spoken with us during their testimony and teachers around outdoor learning have not phrased it as a COVID specific methodology, but rather as something that could be and has been scientifically proven in certain studies to foster learning in other ways, right? And so I also want to follow up on that piece. And I guess my question to folks, and this is to you as well, President Parker, is what do we do next with the survey responses? I found them, each of the responses may deserve a whole conversation to unpack, right? And so I guess now during our working session, do we want to follow up in any form during the public session, our next public meeting, or is it really about just kind of providing that resource for others to follow up on and cite?
Vice President Gasoy.
Thank you. So first, I wanted to shed a little light, I think, on the outdoor learning piece, which is that at the time that this survey was given, there was no clear guidance at all for principals on how to access funding. So it wasn't a very realistic option at that point. I did want to give you an update that new guidelines have been sent to principals as of last Friday. And unfortunately, it is only funding for physical objects. Like they can get furniture or they can get, specific, tools, but they can't use it for partnerships, which is, again, I think I've been emphasizing this in various forums, that the partners are the ones in many cases that make this possible or even feasible for principals to think about at this point. And so that, I think it's a real oversight in general, not just for outdoor learning. I think that there's a misunderstanding about how important our school partners are across the board, both during school hours and out of school time partners. And so it's something that it's a little mystifying to me, because even the partners that were have long-term relationships with schools pre-pandemic are getting cut. So it's just something to be aware of. And I think to Representative Sutter's point, it definitely impacts what principals are going to even, consider because it's just too much otherwise. It's really logistically difficult to think about some of these things if all you have is furniture. Who's going to teach it? What curriculum are you going to use? How are you going to keep the kids safe? I think those are the things that partners really make feasible. So I just wanted to note that. I also again, to Representative Sutter's point earlier, to Asi about asking these questions at different times in the course of this crisis, I think it's really important for this survey as well. Also, and this is not a brag, but I think the fact that there are so many principals from one ward and so few from some others, and that it's all over the place, makes it hard to read it. It's really I don't know. So it might be worth going back and sort of, at least with certain questions, maybe following up, seeing which questions are the ones that we think are most relevant right now to follow up on and try to get a more representative sample from across our wards, and just to get sort of a more current take on what's happening now.
Thank you. And Representative Chang, I'm realizing that I believe you ended with a question. I wasn't sure if that was rhetorical or you wanted us to engage in discussion around what to do next, but also want to open up space for members to respond to that. So what should we do next with this report? It seems like Vice President Gasoy is putting an idea on the table of following up with some principals and wards where maybe we didn't have high response rates, or choosing a subset of questions to double down on and circle back with principals. So for those who are coming up, please feel free to also share about what we should do next. Representative O'Leary.
Yes, I two things. First, about the librarians. When I was on my way to the meeting this afternoon, my son, I was talking about going to a meeting about librarians, and he said, do all the schools in the city have libraries? And I said, yes. And he said, well, why are they worrying about not having a librarian? I mean, shouldn't a librarian, if they have a library, shouldn't they have a librarian? And it sounded so simple. And that leads into what y'all are talking about. And it really is what our role is as a board. And we may be the only ones that are spreading the word to our community. And we might as well just go all in on that. If you're not doing it now, then you need to do it. And I think that's what we have to come in when we have this retreat. We've got to come in with some kind of guidelines on what our role really is as the State Board of Education. Because if not us, who? I'm out.
Sorry, that last statement got me. But no, I agree, Representative O'Leary. And I was actually texting, one of the things we do have oversight or responsibility rather for is parent engagement. And so there could be a world where we set expectations or bare minimums for how we want parents throughout the city to be engaged. And that too could be something we reflect on either later in this meeting or punt to our upcoming retreat. Representative Weidenberg.
Am I on? So this is just to relate back a little bit to what Representative Sutter and some other ones were saying, if I'm getting it, is that maybe people are picking the high dosage tutoring as opposed to the outdoor learning because it's simpler from where they sit. And that is relates to a broader concern I have on this high dosage tutoring. If you're picking it because you're going to bring in people from the outside and it's all kind of done, it's like a menu. I'm really worried that we're going to get to the end of this 3 years later, we're going to have spent all this money and we're still not going to have the infrastructure in place that we've all been talking about, which is to have somebody in every school who's a reading specialist, who knows how to identify whether there are students with real reading learning issues that need to be addressed. We still won't have every K2, K3 teacher in every school really well trained in science of reading. We won't have someone in every school who can do coaching, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like, if we're gonna do the reading, boy, I'd love to end up with an infrastructure that allows us to go forward, not have it have been, we just brought these people in and it was the easiest thing to do and we did it in the easiest possible way. That's all.
Representative Thompson.
So I think the thing I'm wrestling with is Sophie on this. It's a supply and a demand question. I think early enough in our conversations about what was needed for education in the pandemic, there's been this pervasive narrative of learning loss. And what some might assume is a logical solution to address that is tutoring. Because if you haven't gotten enough learning, then you just need more intense learning, right? That we're now seeing, as we're starting to think about how do we move beyond just recovery, that there actually might be more to what students in schools should be doing, what students need beyond just accelerated learning. Like that's what the high dosage tutoring investment is supposed to address. When I heard Representative Gasoy ask the question around outdoor learning and money for like the materials versus money for the partners that could do it, it's not that we're not providing money for partners. We actually are. There's a substantial amount of money in the budget that will go to partners. They just have to be partners that provide high dosage tutoring. We've elevated that over any other type of out of school time program, and with the acknowledgement that all high dosage tutoring might not happen in out of school time, that part of the actual most effective delivery of it would be tied to the school day, because that's when you can capture the greatest number of students. But there is an assumption baked in that that's what kids need. That's where our money is going. That's what our city leaders are talking about as a solution. And I think that very much I don't know where in the discourse we've really wrestled with what else could we be doing in a serious way. I've heard, especially from probably mostly like the Student Advisory Committee, and then vaguely in some community engagements. I know that, I don't know how long ago that was, Representative Patterson and Reed and I tried to have our own engagement for 7 and 8, and we heard some things that were outside of just the, learning loss narrative, but that really has dominated as a solution. And I actually don't actually think it tracks with what I've heard from families or from students. And I'm really struggling to figure out what is my responsibility as someone who doesn't completely sit on the outside to help bridge that gap. Yeah, I don't know, but to me, that is what's happened here, is that we have largely focused on learning loss, and I get it, that's important, but therefore the solution is high dosage tutoring. Therefore, that's where we spent all of our money. Therefore, that's what we've talked about the most, and what our school leaders will point to where they're likely going to spend their money. Like that makes sense to me. I'm not so sure it necessarily captures things like regression. So like I've heard some parents talk to me, especially SPED parents who haven't received their services, about regression. Like things like, my kid was receiving, services around speech, like speech services, and now they're so frustrated they don't even speak anymore. Or my kid has a physical, disability and has special needs around that, and they were doing X, Y, and Z, and now they can't even do like one push-up. High dosage tutoring doesn't actually address the types of things that honestly are the things that have stuck with me and kind of sat on my heart, as far as like, these are the kids who we have served the least by the pandemic. And I feel like this is not an answer to Representative Chang's question, as far as like, what are we going to do with this survey? But I don't know where to put that. How do we expand? What is our responsibility as the board? Where do we push others to really engage and address the things that families are saying that they're really struggling with? And the learning loss, high dosage tutoring budget questions aren't getting us there.
Representative O'Sullivan.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, well, as a student and as someone who has tutored kids of all different ages, and I lead a tutoring program at my school for middle school students, since we're a high school and middle school. And I feel like there's a misconception about what tutoring does, because throughout like my experiences as a tutor, I think what students take away the most is usually that relationship they build. Well, in my case, it's with other students. But when you're coming to tutoring, it's not always that you're going to get X, Y, and Z done. You may only sometimes get X done or half of X done. And I don't like the idea of tutoring being used to get a student someplace that every student has to get to, because like Representative Thompson said, people have many different needs. And even when people's parents sign, even when kids' parents sign them up to be tutored, it doesn't mean that kid wants to be tutored. It doesn't mean he's going to put in the energy to actually get the most out of it. And it doesn't mean he's going to have the experience he needs. And it concerns me because I think whenever you look at everything that has happened in the pandemic, the fact that every kid has totally different needs, if you try to solve it all through one size fits all method, it's not going to work. And I'm actually worried about some of the negative effects it will have on students, because have we really thought about what 2 sessions, maybe 2 hours or 45 minutes each session, 2 days per week, on top of an 8-hour school day, and who knows what's going on at home, what does that do to a kid throughout the course of a 180-day school year? And I don't think necessarily that whatever high dosage tutoring is, because I don't really know what that is, and I don't think 2 sessions a week is very high dosage. And one of the tutoring programs I was in as a freshman, that was considered normal. And it wasn't like we were, you know, teaching to a test. There was a curriculum we followed, but it was more than anything getting students to learn new words, getting them better at reading stories and understanding characters. But I don't think that's like, I don't think the goal of using the tutoring program is the correct one. And I'm concerned because I feel like if we try to make this something that, you know, it will solve all of kids' issues, we are not going to acknowledge the fact that students coming in, a lot of students, this isn't their main concern. A lot of students are coming in. There was a student in our student advisory committee meeting yesterday who said they used to be the kid who loved to speak up in class, and now it makes them nervous to do so. They get anxiety when they try to speak, and it becomes hard to speak out, and they used to be that kid who loved to speak out. So I'm just worried about when we talk about tutoring, I don't think that is the #1 solution to any of our problems. And I'm worried about what this reliance on it may lead to. And I'm worried that it'll lead to burnout with students who sign up. And I'm worried that like we're just going to make this the solution and get complacent after that, then we'll have more troubles to deal with. So I don't know, I like Representative Thompson's idea, but I think we need to think more specifically about what students actually need. And I think maybe we should be asking, what do students actually need? Especially younger students coming back, ask families, what do they need? Instead of just assuming that their #1 priority is catching up to grade level, whatever it may be. So that's what I have to say.
Representative Sutter.
Yeah, I appreciate the dialogue on tutoring. I think one thing I hope we think about from the board's perspective is, to your point in the chat, President Parker, what we heard about from the researchers who came to speak about the tutoring as an intervention is the difference between sort of the colloquial term tutoring. So I'm struggling in my geography class. I have a tutor who's going to help me get better at geography. I think what we're talking about from the research perspective, and what I hope is what the funding is spent on. I take everyone's points very seriously that we want to make sure that this is research and evidence-based and programs that are designed to be interventions and not sort of generic additional supports for students, is that it would not extend a school day, is that it would not be something on top of everything. It would be, as an example, a typical reading class is a 90-minute block. It might instead look like 45 minutes of teacher-led instruction and small group work, and then 45 minutes of students broke off into some students doing independent work, some students meeting in small group with the teacher, some students receiving tutoring on the reading time. So it's meant to target students as an intervention, thinking about like response to intervention. You've got the tier 1 instruction, tier 2, and then tier 3. That's my understanding of what we in the education research community are talking about when we talk about high dosage tutoring. It isn't sort of a generic kids spending more time after school working on getting homework support. It is actually a targeted intervention on a specific subject in which students need that additional support, and ideally as part of the regular school day. So I'll say in my day job work that I've been doing, I've watched a couple of different pilot programs happening. One that's happening here in DC, the city tutor folks who are standing this up are running what they're calling design sprints with schools to help them define what tutoring will look like in the context of their individual school. And they did a webinar on it. They've got some really interesting like articles and blogs about how they're working with individual schools to design tutoring programs that fit into their school day. Second thing, I'm seeing schools slot it into intervention blocks they already had in their calendars. So the school already had an intervention block where students were being pulled for things. Now that's where tutoring is going. So I encourage us to keep asking these questions, but I hope that we can keep our eye on we want to understand how it's benefiting students and how it's being done with fidelity and according to the research and evidence base, and making sure that it's not just another thing thrown on kids and families. But I also hope that we don't throw it out as, well, it's a terrible idea because it's just one more thing for kids. Because I think if done right and with the research evidence-based, it could be very helpful for the students for whom it is intended, in addition to the mental health supports, the social emotional supports, the focus on play, the focus on outdoor education. I just hope we don't get sidetracked into some of this is good and some of this is bad, but rather any of this done with fidelity to the research evidence has a better chance of success for our kids than things done willy-nilly.
Thank you all for your engagement there. As a next step, Representative Chang's question, I'm going to take Vice President Gasoy up on that offer. We will follow up to identify questions that we may want to reintroduce to principals. As I mentioned in the chat, we already asked principals if we could follow up. And so we have a list that would be willing. And as was mentioned, there's many principals that did not engage. And so there's an opportunity to still hear from them. The jury is still out on what we do with this information. Again, as I mentioned, it was shared with stakeholders. Mr. Hayworth, I would suggest we should at least attach this as an appendix to our budget testimony as evidence of some of the work that we did. We could talk offline about that unless you want to jump in here.
Once approved by the board, I am happy to share with anyone.
The report. Yes, which I'm going to entertain a motion to adopt the report officially tonight. Is there a second?
Second.
Being properly moved and seconded. Representative Chang, did you make the motion and
Sorry.
Okay,
yeah.
I thought it was you. Okay, is there a second to the? Okay, it has been properly moved and seconded. Seconded by Representative Patterson. Mr. Hayworth, please call the roll.
Dr. Gasoy.
Aye.
Mr. Chang.
Aye.
Wattenberg.
Aye.
Dr. O'Leary.
Aye.
Dr. Sutter.
Aye.
Ms. Thompson.
Aye.
Mr. Patterson.
Aye.
Mr. O'Sullivan.
Aye.
President Parker.
Aye.
The report is adopted.
Thank you. Members, we will follow up on this as well as include it as an attachment to our budget testimony. But thank you again for reaching out to principals. And I truly appreciated the discussion that we just had around some of the findings, but also getting clear around what we need to reopen schools. We're going to now switch gears to our committee reports. As a reminder, each committee chair will have 5 minutes to update members on their work for the previous month. If a committee needs extra time, please make a motion for that request. But I'm going to ask, just given that we're already well over our allotted time for our agenda, that we stick to the 5-minute caps here. So we're going to start with the Student Advisory Committee. And Representative O'Sullivan, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, President. So basically, we had our first of 3 consecutive meetings yesterday. We're writing our report. So our next meeting is next Monday, then the Monday after that. I think you all are invited to next week's meeting. We asked for you all not to come to the week after meeting so we can just work on the report. So that's why you all weren't invited to yesterday's meeting, just so we could do some more work. But, you know, typically you all would be invited. So if there is anything you all need to say anything, present anything, email me, let me know, and we'll get you included in the agenda. Yesterday, we met and talked about distance learning, something we've already talked about a lot. We were just kind of sharing some final thoughts on things, including student mental health, some of the virtual learning experiences, and then also what things students would be interested in keeping from virtual learning in a fully in-person learning environment. And those are things that will be included in the final report we submit for the next public meeting in a couple weeks. And next week we plan on talking about school reopening and what students would need to feel safe, and also what they would like to see in a fully in-person school environment again. So sort of similar to the end of our discussion yesterday about what things about distance learning they would like to keep. So that's going to be part of our discussion. You all are welcome to be there for that part as well. If you guys just want to listen to what we have to say, but everything we say will be included in the final report, as well as some recommendations. And then the week after that, we'll be working on planning our pretty much the campaign we are hoping the state board can sort of do to promote the student advisory committee, student representative applications this summer, so we can try to get as many people as possible to apply. And that's something that when we present, we will have all of you involved in actually carrying it out. So there are going to be some ideas lined up for things we should do and how we can use different platforms to try to encourage as many students as possible to apply, so that as many schools actually know it exists and they know what the role is. Since we expanded to 4 representatives, that's twice as many opportunities, or I guess a twice better chance to become a student representative. And of course, I believe we accept all student advisory committee applicants, and that's the goal. So we're hoping that with the final report, we'll get more applicants, and that will probably be the final part of our SAC report. We'll also touch on inequities, which we talked about a bit yesterday. And as I brought up today about funding in particular, a lot of students are concerned about, if things go back in person, how will things look different in a bad way? What some of those funding cuts may mean tangibly for students, and what some of the staff mean. So there will be recommendations on all of these things. So yeah, that's pretty much all we have. And then I believe the application should be opening soon. So that's it from the Student Advisory Committee.
Members, any questions? All right, Representative O'Sullivan, I'm excited for the release of the application. Please be sure to let us know how we can support the work that you all are doing leading up to that launch. But very impressive work, very impressive work. Thank you. We are going to turn it over to our Advocacy and Outreach Committee, Representatives Weidenberg and Patterson. I'm going to turn it over to you. Oh, I'm sorry, Advocacy Outreach. Representative Reed is not here tonight.
I am this spokesperson.
Representative O'Leary will give the report in lieu of Representative Reed.
The Outreach and Advocacy Committee met on Friday, May 21st. The committee heard from 2 guest speakers related to student justice initiatives. The presenters suggested that the board members continue to highlight students involved in the juvenile justice system in testimony, specifically asking counsel to support the Special Education Rights for Youth Defendants Amendment Act, which puts a pilot in place that would allow private special education attorneys who would be paid by the court to represent young people. This would eliminate financial barriers for these students. Additionally, the SBOE was encouraged to advocate around data issues that impact OSSE's transportation system. Representative Sutter presented on safe commutes for all students, including those who bike and walk to school, and advocacy around safe passage. After discussion, the committee concluded that it would invite Dan Davis to present updates on the Safe Passages report and assess what ward level actions may need to be needed. A draft of the process for outreach and advocacy efforts will be circulated to committee members by the chair. The committee is still working on completing action steps from 2020 resolutions. There has been some follow-up on Latinx teacher retention. The next committee meeting will be on June 18th at 10 a.m. That's our report.
Thank you for that report. Next up is the Accountability and Assessments Committee, Representatives Weidenberg and Patterson. Now I'm going to turn it over. Oh, I'm sorry. Representative Sutter, did you have a question or comment for Representative O'Leary?
Yeah, and I appreciate the chance to ask it. It may be a question I should ask Representative Reed when she's back. I had a constituent reach out on an issue that they wanted to have the board consider for advocacy, and they were told that there was a process now that folks who wanted the board to consider an issue for advocacy needed to come testify at a board meeting. Is there a process in place, or is that something still under consideration?
I would pass it on to John Paul.
It's still under consideration.
Say again?
Okay.
It's still under, it's something that we discussed. We didn't even really discuss it. I think Representative Reed talked about it, but we haven't made any decision about that yet.
Okay.
Okay, because the constituent basically was told that they weren't able to have their issue considered by the board because they had not testified publicly at a board meeting. So sounds like I should suggest them to take another bite at that apple and come back to us with that request.
If you could find out who told them that, that would be a big help.
Sure. Yeah,
Thank
no, I'm very happy to do that. And I'll suggest that they come back around with us.
Yeah, and
Thank
to
you.
encourage them to testify. Good point. Both,
Yes.
but they don't have to. They don't have to.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Assessments and Accountability, Representatives Weidenberg and Patterson.
All right, thank you, President Parker. Since we co-chair together, it is my opportunity to go and give us our report this time with some input from Representative Weidenberg. So without any delay, we met basically based on some of the conversations that we had in our last working meetings on the timeline. And to that, we've made some revisions. We greatly extended the time for members to engage in the community discussions to make sure that everybody is really getting to the meat and to the people that they need to get to. We know that different communities need different timelines, so we extended that time. We largely kept to front loading a lot of what the development work, surveys and things like that. This was done so that these engagement materials can be put together and they'll be available for everyone. And also, hopefully, the accommodations will, allow people to do what they need to do. So basically, just really extending the timeline, and we're going to be working with the group to design what the surveys look like. We're still in that process right now. We held a very, very nice and energetic meeting with the Student Advisory Committee, and really appreciate Representative O'Sullivan for his leadership of that and engaging us and allowing the conversation to go that it went. It was awesome how we did that, and just really appreciate him. And we look forward to coming back and engaging them even more as we go throughout this process. We're also in the process of reaching out to stakeholders. At the current time, we do know that we're heading into summer, so that timeline was put into place to make sure and be considerate of that. And we did what we call a pilot kind of test run with C4DC, where we just went over basically a mocked up presentation to get their input, to see what they thought about it. We are very cognizant of the fact that different groups will need different things, but we did want to hear from them as representatives that encompass all of the education councils throughout the city, and they had input, and it was a good meeting because they had representation from all the wards in this particular meeting to give us some thoughts on how we should be presenting to communities. So we really appreciate their feedback, and we'll be talking about that more with the other members to make sure that we present our presentations really address the needs of communities and their differences. We also held last week a presentation by two experts, Jack Snyder and Mr. Pruitt, Dr. Pruitt. And we just talked about basically the accountability frameworks and how to make them accountable on both sides, so mutually accountable. They brought some very interesting insight into how to do that. So it was a 2-hour meeting on May 20th where they did their presentations, and then we entertained questions afterwards. And Darren will be providing some more insight into the minutes that came out of that, but just a very good meeting. And we look forward to just going forward with this and the timeline and engaging everyone. I don't know if I forgot anything, Representative Wattenberg, that you would like to add as well that I may have skipped over.
You're muted.
Okay, the one thing I would just add on the timeline is everything you said, and then, so it's extended, it still starts early, we'll get materials. And the idea is that people will have the summer for those who it works for, but all of September to really engage deeply. And then ideally, we're looking at potentially having a vote on this if we have a set of recommendations in October, but we will, look at that when we're there and make sure October feels good to people. Is that how you'd put it, Jacques?
That's basically yes. That's exactly right. Were there other questions?
I have a question. For the recommendations, those are being compiled from the feedback you hear from these community engagement forums?
I would say it's a mix of the community. Oh, sorry.
Yes. Is it that, and or is it coming from committee members themselves?
And the experts, I would say it's all of that.
Yes, I agree. It's coming from all of that. We want to be informed by the community. We want to be informed by some experts that have done this accountability work and really thought out some great plans that we've seen are some best practices in other states. So we want to be informed by those to make sure that whatever recommendations that we bring, and of course, our members, including our committee members, to make sure that we're addressing those issues.
Another quick follow-up question. So let's say I held an event in Ward 5, which I'm interested in, willing, and wanting to do.
Thank you.
The average Ward 5 parent isn't deeply knowledgeable about how to structure an accountability system. So how are we balancing like the need to inform, update, educate, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but also seeking genuine input and feedback on our current system and how to change it?
Mm-hmm. And what I would say to that, because that is a great question. I come from Ward 8 and they're not deeply into, really saying, okay, policy making of a framework in that sense. They know what they want to see in a school and they know what they want to have a school and identify, but they're not into it the same way that we are. And we're still working on that, to be honest with you, to make sure that we are both educating so that they truly do understand and that there's equity built into that educating, and then getting their feedback to be effective in that equity work as well. So I'm not going to say that we definitively know how to give you like a template of a PowerPoint at this current time and say this works, but we're still working on that aspect.
And the other thing specifically that we're working on is Darren in particular has been great. We're trying to come up with, I would say, activities that can sort of embed so that as you're going through, you have these different ways of talking to people and getting input. What indicators do you like? Here's a list. What makes sense to you? And I'm trying to remember, Jacques, what some of the others were, but they were, they were on the way to being very good, I think is what I would say. But
and again, President Parker, we also know that what one community sees as a metric that should be added and is important may not be the same for a different community based on those equity things. And we want to bring all that to bear and try to pull that out. We're very cognizant of that point of doing equity by design, using those principles to make sure that we're addressing those issues.
I know we're over time. We're going to transition. I appreciate the asset-based framing, Representative Patterson, and I just want to clarify, I'm not saying because parents are from Ward 5 or Ward 8, they don't know. I don't think any parent in
nobody knows.
Yeah, I don't think any parent in the city that's not a policy wonk will be able to, navigate in the details of how to update our system. And so I do think that education component is going to be important.
And I agree with you, and I feel the same way. I'm not trying to say that my ward does not understand or know how to do this work.
I know that's not what you meant, but for those watching.
Yes,
part of the idea is to do it as a mix of sort of getting what we're calling sort of raw feedback so that we really get what people are thinking about, and then give them some ideas to bounce off of. So when you leave, you have a sense of where they came in and what fills, what meets that need, if anything.
Just an idea, and I'm sorry for time, but maybe it's like a 2-part conversation or a 3-part conversation versus trying to pack it into an hour-and-a-half meeting, which I would imagine it would be, the first of which might be like, let's inform you, update you on the road to our current platform and rating system, and the work that has been done. The second maybe is around like getting feedback. And the third is maybe getting the public to weigh in again on the recommendations. I would not feel like 1 hour-and-a-half or even 2-hour conversation with Ward 5 families would be sufficient for me to say, this is what families want. So just thinking multi-part may be a better way. So thank you all for your engagement there. I know you all are putting in a lot of work, as are all of our committees. And so again, thank you. We're gonna move to board governance. Representative Thompson, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
So Representative Thompson is delinquent in submitting her written report, but we'll do so this evening. The Education Governance Committee did not hold our May meeting. We have rescheduled our guests in the May meeting for the June meeting. So joining us will be Dr. Heather Harding. She formerly headed up EdCore. For people who are familiar with EdCore back in the day, which no longer exists, it was a research partnership out of GW that actually did the review of para. They did the review of the MEMAV Active Para of 2007. And that's a good level setting for us to see at that point, like literally what was everything from why we instituted para in the first place to what different stakeholders had to share about their pain points at that particular point in time. We have actually selected 2 research students who will be working with us to do the meta review. So they will be introduced to the full governance committee on June 11th at that meeting. And we're really looking forward to working with them. I think that's our update. I will make sure to include in our written report a link to just a little more information on the para review and EdCore, so people have that foundation. Any questions?
Any questions? Not seeing any, I would jump in. It's more of just a point. Yesterday, the Illinois State Assembly voted to change the governance structure in Chicago. And I guess the question there, and maybe this is a suggestion for staff if it's not already happening, just like how are we tracking what's happening around the country? I know our focus is here on DC, but like those decisions may also inform the recommendations we ultimately may come up with.
So it is something we have talked about as a committee. And it's one of the things that we've asked our students as they do the review, both to get an idea of what the larger context is, in addition to our unique DC context and history for how we got here.
Awesome. Any other questions, comments?
I guess it's exciting to hear about the graduate students, but I just am, so can you say more about that? Like what the process has been and where they're coming from and all of it?
Well, I met them once. I think John Paul can say a lot more than I can. So we had, I think, 2 options as a committee. And in adherence to our budget standards, we took the option of 2 grad students to do the review. I believe they are from American University, John Paul? Yes, that is right. They're both from American University. I don't know the full process that the staff underwent. John Paul can probably speak to that better than I can. We had an initial meeting, when I say we, myself and the staff, with them after they were selected, just to share more about the governance committee and the work we were undertaking, so they would better understand that. And then our intention was to invite them to our full committee meeting, so that all the committee members would know who they are and better understand what they bring to this work. John Paul, I'm sure you have more to add to that.
Yeah, absolutely. We've partnered with American University for a number of years. During the summer program, there's a policy course, and we are very lucky to have a strong inroads with the professor. The course is, yeah, that would be Dr. Sutter. The course itself is designed for individuals in the grad program to work directly with agencies and organizations to really get hands-on work in a project. And we submitted a number of potential projects that were then reviewed, and we talked about what was in the work plan of the state board and how we might use those fellows to help move those projects forward. And this is the project that was suggested by the board governance committee was the one that seemed to fit best within the timeline and within the right capabilities for a grad level project that we could use. Members who've been on the board for a while will remember that we've had similar programs through. We had grad students work through our we were working on high school graduation requirements, when we were working on health education standards, and when we worked on a number of other projects, we utilized this group in order to help, well, frankly, to make sure that we had the capacity to do everything that we wanted to do. And this project fit in with that. So we're really excited to work again with American and with Dr. Sutter in that class.
I'm happy to just say two other things. So the course is called a Pro Seminar, and it's for students finalizing their Masters of Education Policy and Leadership at American University. There are two sections of the class right now. For those of you who know Alicia Robinson, she's the professor teaching the other section of the course. And we each work with our networks to find policy projects. So we have some students working from my section with the Office of the Student Advocate on some attendance policy. We have students working with City Tutor, learning more about their design sprints, which I talked about earlier. We have some students who are working with the Public Charter School Board on accountability based on the survey that I know Darren shared out with some of us. They're working with PCSB to gather, to help with analysis and research on their updates to the performance management framework. So students were able to look at all the project options and self-select into the ones that they wanted. So the students who are working on behalf of the governance committee chose this project. My role is facilitator. I basically help them manage a project plan, make sure that the products they're turning into you are quality. It is not at all in the content. So it's very funny. The students have actually asked me, they're like, so what do you think the board wants? I was like, better ask them, because the committee's going to tell you what they want. I'm not on that committee. So I think you've got two really quality students that you're working with on the project, but they are Masters of Ed Policy students. Both have been teachers. One is currently, I think, working in a legal capacity, and the other has been both a teacher and administrator. She's been in the field for a while.
Thank you. And thank you, Representative Thompson. Representative Sutter, we're going to come back to you as we hear the report from the Education Standards Committee.
Awesome. Thank you. So we talked about a couple of different things at the Education Standards Committee. In our report, we sort of put them in this order. The first is homeschooling. We actually have space at our July public meeting to have a panel come speak about homeschooling. That panel is starting to take shape, and there's more details about that in the committee report. This is a topic that Representative Reed had raised to the committee as one of interest. And when we looked at some data, we noticed that during the pandemic, the number of families registered with OSSE as homeschooling families roughly doubled. So we wanted to learn a little bit more about who these families are, why they're choosing homeschooling. And so Representative Reed is seeking to recruit a panel of families who have chosen to homeschool to come speak about their experiences, what supports they're getting from OSSE, what other supports they might need. Because one of the things under the state board's purview is homeschooling standards for the state of DC. And so that's sort of the intention of this panel, is to learn more about families who've made this choice, understand what supports are available, and understand what, if any, additional engagement the board may wish to take in terms of the standards around homeschooling, as well as the supports provided to families. one reason I think it's of particular interest to Representative Reed is that there has been an increase, not just in DC, but reflected in DC, in Black families who have chosen to homeschool their children. And so that is also a piece of the panel representation we're hoping to make, is to make sure that we're recruiting families in DC who represent sort of the city as a whole and the population of families, the city as a whole. So that's our homeschooling discussion. Then we talked a little bit about the state literacy plan, and Representative Chang worked with our staff and with our outside partners to create a survey that we can use to try to begin to help map the landscape of education, literacy education partners in the city. So folks who work in conjunction with our schools, folks who work as out of school time partners, folks who work in conjunction with our libraries, with adult literacy, et cetera. And so that survey got some feedback from OSSE and DCPS, from a few trusted partners, and we're finalizing contact information to start sending out that survey to as many literacy partners as we know of, and try to sample from there. Who else might they refer to us? Who are people working in literacy, organizations working on literacy in the city? And we'll be putting that survey out, we hope, sometime in the next 2 weeks. We also talked about the ethnic studies conversation that Representative Chang brought to the board. Where we landed on for now is the thought of how we connect that into the work that the social studies committees are doing, the Social Studies Standards Advisory Committee, as well as the Technical Writing Committee. And Representative Chang and I are going to talk some more, but we're going to try to target an opportunity to have some of the panelists he's talked with come speak with both our CISAC and our Technical Writing Committee at some point later this summer. Both to, sorry for having a dog interrupting the call moment, both to talk about how this topic plays into standards, as well as how it plays into the resources, supports, and opportunities teachers have to address helping students see cultures other than their own, or their own culture represented in classrooms. I'd be remiss if I didn't note that we also talked about the great conversation Representative Chang had with the Student Advisory Committee, and how many different stories we heard from the students that really validated all the concerns Representative Chang brought to us, that so many of the students have not seen their own cultures reflected in their history classrooms, have not had a chance to learn about things that are not constructed in comparison to whiteness. So it was a fascinating and disheartening conversation in some ways, but as they say, the kids are all right, and they had good suggestions. Finally, social studies standards. The Technical Writing Committee is continuing its work and has started to break off into smaller writing groups. We are having our CISAC quarterly meeting next Tuesday evening, and we're going to have an update from the members who are part of the Technical Writing Committee, providing some feedback to us on how it's going. We're going to talk a little bit about what professional groups and other social studies communities our teachers in the CISAC are part of, and how we can start to continue to build a social studies community as part of this standards work. And then we're also going to bring this conversation about the ethnic studies panel to the CISAC to get additional feedback and insights from them. So 13 seconds left. That's our report.
Thank you. Representative O'Leary, you have a question?
I do. It's really a procedural question. Does, when you have a homeschooling panel, I would really be interested, can OSSE be a member of a panel? I guess I'm asking John Paul. Because I think it would be really helpful to me to know, when you mentioned OSSE having to do with homeschooling, when we have the people who are talking about homeschooling, to have someone else talk about what the city is responsible as far as homeschooling. Do you understand? Does that make sense?
I'm happy to let John Paul listen, but I'll also mention we talked about that during the committee meeting, and we have not landed on a solution yet, but I want to share with you what we did talk about. So there was talk of having OSSE, and what Representative Reed is sort of wrestling with and thinking on is, do we put OSSE on the same panel as parents? OSSE technically has oversight because they have to register and be monitored by OSSE. Or do we invite OSSE to come, say, to the July working session before the public panel to provide information to the board on OSSE's role in homeschooling so that the panel can be focused on parents and their experience. So we threw out both ideas, and I don't think we've landed on a solution yet. I'm sure Representative Reed will talk with leadership about how best to structure the time that's available, and we can go from there. But we agree with you, Dr. O'Leary, that it would be helpful to hear from OSSE about what the standards are, what the expectations are, and their experience of monitoring families who are homeschooling.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Sutter. Representative O'Leary, coming to you next for the report on Teacher Practice Committee. You're muted, Representative.
Sorry, I must have hit the button again. I've got reopen task forces next.
Yeah, we talked about the report earlier, so that's it for us.
Okay. At the last Teacher Practice Committee meeting, we focused our conversation on teacher diversity and literacy. Regarding teacher diversity, Emily shared that she spoke with OSSE at a separate meeting about the state board's advocacy around diversifying DC's teachers pool, specifically around Latino teacher pipelines. Regarding literacy, we agreed that the committee needs to do more information gathering, so we have invited Dr. Anika Burton from UDC's graduate program to talk to us at our next committee meeting, which is next week, about how they are preparing their teachers to teach reading. And if you don't know, UDC has the most highly rated literacy program of the universities in the city. And then Alistair noted that at our last meeting that it is unclear to what extent a teacher has received literacy training or not. If they received it in an undergraduate or graduate program, or whether they have received it from a group like the DC Reading Clinic. So we look forward to learning more and speaking with more educator preparation programs. I'd really like to find out more about that from OSSE also. And we're working on trying to get the teacher data bill, which was never voted on last council year, to get that reintroduced to the council so that we can have transparency in teacher data in both the public and the charter schools. And I mean that seriously, in both the public and the charter schools, because for the teacher retention committee report, we really didn't get much information from either of those entities. That's it. Any questions?
Before we get questions, I will just say, yes, I'm excited to work with Representative O'Leary and all of you to get a hearing on the teacher data transparency bill, but also to get it for a vote. We will talk with you more around ways you can help. But one of the things that Mr. Hayward, Vice President Gasoy, and I have discussed is engaging council members. And we want to loop you all in those conversations. But we have had conversations with Chairman Mendelson, who has signaled that he has a willingness to reintroduce the bill sometime this fall. So that is the update for now, but we look forward to discussing and strategizing with you all in the months ahead.
Great.
Questions?
It's on you, Zach.
No questions. Well, thank you, Representative O'Leary. Last but certainly not least, we have our administrative committee report by Vice President Gasoy.
Thank you, President Parker. So we heard from our sister agencies, and Dan and Serena mentioned that they are interested, or they've already started actually in meeting with ward level councils, ed councils. And so they were asking those of us on the committee, you know, when our ed councils meet. So we were able to inform them of that, but they will probably, if they haven't already reached out to you, reach out to other members to find out. And I think it would be a good idea to collect that information and have it be part of our weekly roundup, or have it someplace where we all have access to it. So you'll be hearing from me to try to collect that information about your ward level, when your ward level council meetings are. We had a brief conversation about SBOE letterhead. And so some of you may remember, and some of you may not, that there are actually two types of letterhead. One is for our official, like when we are sending a letter from the SBOE, and then the other is when you as a representative are sending a letter. Mr. Hayworth has sent us each our personal letterhead, but if you don't know where it is, I'm actually going to share the link right now in the chat. It's in our SharePoint, but there it is. And one of the things that we talked about was just, you know, for instance, if say 3 members want to write a letter together, what do you do? So we decided during that meeting that if it was 5 members or more, that we can use the official SBOE letterhead. And if it's under 5 members, then we should use sort of the personal letterhead, and you just put the, you know, names at the top. So that's where we landed with that. We had a brief conversation about leadership titles, again, mainly president and vice president. And I'm just going to, that's in the written report. If there's still any questions or confusion about that, you can look at the written report. But the line of the short is that, you know, during public testimony, it's important that we make clear that we are speaking as, you know, individual representatives for a ward, whereas, for instance, in a newsletter or something like that, we can use our actual titles. But there are other nuances there. So I'll let you read the very interesting, fascinating report. And then, so the main issue that we discussed during this meeting was an idea that Representative Reed brought up a while ago about possibly changing the structure, or not really changing the structure of our meetings, but trying to find a way where we had more time to have in-depth conversations with panelists. And one thing that she proposed was having panelists both at our working sessions and our public meetings, and that the panels at the working session would be more focused on the work that we're doing, and that the public meeting panelists would be more about like local issues, policy issues. And really, I think what we realized it came down to was that we just feel like the 3 minutes that we get is not enough. And so I'm going to actually share another link, which is sort of the ideas that we came up with. And you don't need to respond to this right now, but I just thought it would be useful to see it. But we came up with several possible ways to address this issue. It may be that none of them work, but this is something that the admin committee will bring up again, and that we'll discuss. What did we say, President Parker? We're going to discuss it at our next public meeting. I mean, at our next working meeting, correct? Yes.
That is
so
correct.
We're carving out time. So I will actually share this as a memo, these points.
And to clarify, we were going to talk about it at our retreat, but we are worried about time, and we want to make sure we give space for this conversation. So we thought the working session would allow us to have more robust, long-winded discussion around it.
Yep. So I guess the point here is just more to come, and you can look for a memo from me that has these ideas, and we invite more ideas. And then finally, Representative Wattenberg suggested that at our next meeting, we should discuss how do we make it possible to have to maintain a hybrid meeting, to have like a virtual option for our meetings going forward, even when we're back in person. So that's it. Any questions? Mr. O'Leary.
I have a couple of questions, very short. Last time when I testified the other day at the city council hearing, I was I wasn't testifying representing the board, but I was testifying representing myself as the Ward 4 representative of the board, rather than usually when I testify as a private citizen. Do you understand what I'm saying? So there were three ways I could have testified, because I really was testifying about the buildings in the ward. And so it was as the representative of the board, of the ward, rather than the board representative of the ward.
Right.
Does that make sense? I mean, that's how I introduced myself. But are there only two options, or are there three options?
I think there's three options. It really depends.
Okay, that's fine.
And what you did was perfect, because you were really focused on something specific in your ward, and I think when we collect input or data from our wards, then we are really speaking as the reps for our wards. Whereas, sometimes when I speak about outdoor learning, it's not necessarily as the Ward 1 rep, right? It's as an advocate in the city.
So you're speaking as a private citizen, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to mention that, because it wasn't a quandary, but for the newer members on the board, that there are three options.
Right. And sometimes I speak as a parent too. So.
Right.
Yeah. Good point. Was there another question? No. Okay.
I have a question. Should we be using this letterhead for things like these committee reports that we submit?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, I assume I just put some information in, but I didn't know if there was a uniform template or anything we were supposed to be. Oh, look, John Paul, of course, has the answer.
Go, John Paul.
Usually if reports come to me in a Word form, I put them on letterhead and then upload them if they have not already been. I'm still working on trying to get through all of them from this session, but send them to me either way, and I'll make sure that it's in the correct format.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a good clarification to make. And so that would be official letterhead, because it's for the state board. Jessica.
I apologize. I drifted off for a second there. So I heard there was mention of coming back, a discussion about coming back in person, and a discussion about a virtual option. I saw Representative Thompson clarify that the virtual option is about the public having the opportunity to continue to testify virtually. When are we making the decision about coming back? Just so in my own head, I can start thinking about, like, what's our timeline for that decision?
Great question. Mr. Hayworth, you want to answer that one again?
Sure. So the Office of the Ombudsman, the student advocate, and I have come together and determined what we think is a good path forward in terms of bringing the staff back to the office. And what that largely entails is we are going to maintain a limited staff in the office for the foreseeable future until we can make sure that everyone is safe. And what that will mean is that there will likely not be more than one or two people physically in the office space once we return from recess at any one time. For meetings themselves, for public meetings and working sessions, we're still frankly working on it and trying to figure out exactly how we can do that, how we can do these meetings safely for board members and for the public. We have ordered a number of portable plexiglass dividers that we believe we can use in the old council chambers to help separate members and staff on the dais, but that does not provide the same ability for members of the public to participate virtually. As members know, we did receive funding. Well, the Department of General Services received funding that we requested a number of years ago to upgrade the electronics in the old council chambers. If those upgrades are done, which we are still waiting for approval from the mayor's office on a reprogramming to start those, if those are done, the idea was, even before pandemic hit, for us to be able to do virtual testimony, whether that was from experts on our panel or from members of the public. So if that is completed by the time that we return in after recess in September, there is the potential that we would be able to maintain a virtual testimony ability beyond that. If it doesn't happen, we're not going to be able to do that because of the technology in that room just doesn't lend itself to being able to do that. And so we're hopeful that it will be done. We have been promised that it will be done by the end of the fiscal year. So that would be the end of September. And we're certainly going to attempt to push forward with that as much as we possibly can. And I should note as well that members of the council have also inquired on our behalf to DGS during performance oversight and other hearings about this specific project and making sure that it moves forward. One of the other challenges about that space in general, as you know, is the mayor is using that as sort of the press zone for when she gives updates every Monday. And so there is limited ability for us to get into that room and have all the technology upgraded while it's also being used for other purposes. And so there's also that to consider when DGS is working on these types of things. But the best answer that I can give after all that long thing is we are very hopeful that in September, when we come back officially after the August 18th meeting, we would be able to have virtual testimony from members of the public and from panelists.
Okay. And is the thought then that the board is staying virtual through August and that the earliest return would be in September if that technology is up and running, or even if it is not up and running? Or is that still open for discussion?
I think that's probably still up for discussion. It is my anticipation, and maybe I'm wrong on this and can get guidance from leadership, but it's my anticipation that the August 18th meeting would be virtual to make sure that we have the best ability for the public to participate in that meeting. As members know, the idea for that meeting is for it to be a very public-centered meeting. And I think we should make sure that there is a virtual option, whether that's if we're in the old council chambers or otherwise. But I think September is probably the best date to consider as being the first date back. But if upgrades go faster than we anticipate, we might be able to do that in August as well. It's hard for me to be able to say definitively.
Yeah, I understand. I've started having folks ask, when is the board going back in person? So having some opportunities to provide them answers-ish is helpful.
Thank you. Members, we're gonna quickly transition to new business. Is there any new business that members would like to share for the good of the order? Representative Weidenberg.
Well, actually, Representative Gasoy, are we on the same thing?
I have a few things. So maybe you should go first. I don't care.
So I just wanted to recommend that we all have a resolution about the librarians at our next meeting.
Yeah.
So and if that is the case, then I would urge either someone on the board to volunteer for that or for the staff to write something.
All right. Are there any volunteers that would like Representative O'Leary and Representative Chang? They have raised their hands, so they will.
No, I raised my hand for another thing. But I'd love to edit it. I'd love to edit
it.
it.
Representative Chang, are you?
John Paul, if someone from the staff is willing to help, I've got most of the links and references that I think could be relevant.
Mr. Hayworth, you've been voluntoed, and
just as a note to Representative Chang, to also then prepare to bring these ideas to the Student Advisory Committee if we are doing a resolution entirely. So if you could reach out to Alex and Shayla to schedule that time, that would be helpful.
Thanks for that reminder. And Mr. O'Leary will review and provide feedback and edits. Vice President Kasoy.
Okay, I just wanted to share, I just put yet another link into the chat, and this is for DCPS Virtual Pride, which takes place starting, I believe, this Friday. But you should just go to the link, and that has all the information, and it's several days of speakers and information and entertainment. So it should be cool, and it would be good to share with your constituents, obviously. And then I have one more thing. Hold on one sec. My memory is like a sieve, so I have to write everything down. Let me look. Oh, no, I already talked about that the outdoor learning guidelines have been updated. I will share that with you and just some ideas about advocacy because we unfortunately still need it. So that was it. And I was going to bring up the library resolution. I am happy to help with that, Alistair, if you like, so we can talk. That's it.
Some Representative O'Leary.
Three quick things. If graduations are coming up for DC Public Schools, all of the graduations are going to be at Audi Field. I hope you know about that. And you have to register to get invited. And you should have received something from the chancellor or his office inviting you to that. Please do that. But I don't know why they're having graduations at Audi Field, especially since all the high schools have brand new football fields. But that's not my call. The other thing is and I received, and I talked to Alistair about this, I hope you received a letter from the chancellor this week talking about celebrating AAPI month. I got it on the 28th of May, celebrating AAPI month, which started on the 1st of May. And it also was along with the letter talking about standing ovation. All of us had people who were celebrated at standing ovation. Did any of you get invited to that? Anybody? I don't understand. You, Jessica, you got invited to standing ovation?
Yeah.
Well, that's,
I got the link. I got the link a long time ago for the virtual. It was like a virtual thing. It
was a virtual thing.
It was a virtual thing. And the link came out a long time before. I didn't receive anything that was like, and here are your people in your ward that will be celebrated, that pulled them out more clearly. But I did get the link. I do think the way it was, I think it's something that could have gotten lost in email very easily. There wasn't a whole bunch of
well, I was upset. I was upset that principals and people in the schools in my ward were awarded stuff and I didn't know about it. I don't think
it did not include like, and here's who the awardees were in advance. And no, I was not invited to like go with the, but
because at the regular standing ovations, it's not like the Academy Awards where all of a sudden people find out they're awarded something. They already know they're awarded things when they get there.
Yeah, I've been, and they did know before because they had some pre-recorded video for the awardees, but we did get the invite. They did not have a separate, it's virtual. I chalk it up to limitations of virtual because I've been to standing ovation.
Well, I have too, but I didn't quite understand. Well, and I also, I don't think that we got a notice on the 28th of February that it was Black History Month, and I think that that's a bad oversight, if there's anything good about an oversight, especially I mean, it's really bad timing. But it was especially this last month, which was not a month that really honored AAPI persons nationwide.
Communication. Thanks, Representative. Representative Chang.
Thank you, Representative O'Leary, for flagging that. I appreciate it. I want to start first by, again, bringing the conversation back to school librarians. I forgot to share that DCPS school librarian Christopher Stewart won a Mover and Shaker Award from the Library Journal this year. It's a very prestigious award within the library community, and it's really cool that we have a school librarian from DC who won it. I wanted to flag something that's come across my radar when it comes to digital equity, and it's the Internet Essentials program, and I'm trying to learn more about it. Essentially it provides, what I understand is that it provides families that are at a certain income level with a child in DCPS with subsidized internet at home. And that my understanding is that there's they're looking for help to actually share information about it and work with families to register. And I wanted to flag that because I think, you know, we've touched upon digital equity and digital inclusion. I feel like it's fallen off the radar for a bit, given that we're not sure if students are going to be back, you know, we're pretty sure that students are going to be back in person in the fall, but I just wanted to flag it because I do think it's something that if we wanted to, you know, actually move the needle on this, keep following up with it. And this seems like an opportunity to do that.
That's right. And correct me if I'm wrong, that Internet Essentials program, isn't it time capped, like they receive the benefit for a certain amount of time before the price then jumps or something like that? I think that's some of the feedback that I've heard from families. But anyway, no, thanks for flagging that, Representative Chang. Representative Thompson.
Yeah, so this is actually also one of the things that why it's good to have clarity around what's happening federally with emergency funds, because they are extending, and not through the infrastructure bill, but they are extending some of these support like low cost internet. And so what I believe was an initial period has been extended. I saw, and I'm gonna be honest, I'm clearly not on top of my emails, but I saw that maybe, I don't know if Comcast or somebody reached out to update us maybe today, and it was like kind of a last minute thing. So I would encourage people to pay attention to that. I'm pretty sure I also have, I got a briefing about this for my job that pays me more than this. And we'll go back and look at those materials and see if I can find and share those. I want to say we got a briefing from Counsel about this maybe about 2 months ago. So there are supports that do continue for students that have nothing to do with whether we return to in-person or not. I will say one of the things that I'm a little disappointed about, and I hope that if there is more federal funding, particularly around infrastructure, that we as a city really do take seriously the push for citywide connectivity, because, you know, anything can be a paperweight, and that includes a laptop that somebody is given because their Wi-Fi doesn't work. And we, in particular, in Ward 7 and other parts of the city, but like Ward 7 actually lags in connectivity behind everybody else. And so whether it's, you know, access to pre-registration for vaccines, or getting your lessons done, or whatever it is, if you do not have internet that is high speed and high quality, you are in trouble. and you can't testify at our SBOE meetings and tell us about it. And you can't do a whole bunch of things. So I really do think that as we have this equity focus for our city, that's something we need to really figure out how to prop up and champion, is that access to affordable, or if not free, like we could do free public Wi-Fi. That would be awesome. I actually think Baltimore has a coalition around it. Baltimore is really, and I hate to say this as a native Washingtonian, but Baltimore has really been putting us to shame around planning for students in a comprehensive, holistic type of way. Dr. Sanselisis, we should be jealous. And she is a model for what leadership looks like across this nation. We do not have to look too far to figure out what it looks like. So yeah, that's where I'm at on it. I will take the homework assignment and go and figure out what's already in my email about this, but there are more resources that are available to individual families to seek out, regardless of whether we return to in-person instruction fully or not.
Awesome. A few things. Just wanting to reiterate the upcoming launch of the student rep applications that Representative O'Sullivan highlighted. I've found it helpful to kind of give a runway for partners and families. I would encourage you all to do the same. When the applications when they do come out, I would imagine that's not going to be top of mind for a lot of our school communities, but it's also going to be important that we get the word out. So just a reminder there. Also wanting to highlight DCPS's Virtual Pride schedule and events. Mr. Hayworth, if you could drop the schedule in the chat, you will see a range of events that they have going on throughout the month. I would also highlight and remind us of the event coming up on the 19th. I'm excited that we've agreed to take this on. We're partnering with our sister offices, DCPS, many other LEAs. We're going to keep reaching out. I would encourage you to put a plug in for your ward councils. It will be great to have a citywide push for this event. And we are going to share more information. I'm going to say by Monday. I would say by Friday, but that might be too ambitious. And what we're doing now is just trying to get the sign-ons of who's going to co-sponsor, so we can have all of the details, the flyer, et cetera, to get to you to Monday, where we're going to start pushing. So that is what's happening behind the scenes. And that is all I have. Anything else for the good of the order before we move to close our meeting?
Before I make a motion to adjourn,
yes.
When y'all are putting this stuff in the chat, can you also send it by an email? Because I don't know how to print up stuff from my laptop.
You can you click on the link, Fraser?
I can click on, I can see it there, but I'd like to have it.
That's all but that's all it is. It's just a link. I mean, if I send it to you in an email, it would be a link too. So it wouldn't do anything different, is what I'm saying.
No, I know, but I understand what you're saying, but I don't.
I'll export the chat and email it to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ebony Rose.
Not hard.
Okay, now I'll make a motion to.
How do you do that?
You click these little three dots at the bottom, you save the
I know how to get it, but I don't know how to do it.
No, she just
I
asked.
learned something new.
And then you send it.
I'm ready to learn something new, but it's 8:30.
8:40.
I make a motion that we adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second. To that real quick.
Wait, Ebony Rose has a question though, or thought, or no? Oh, okay.
There is a motion on the floor that has been properly seconded to adjourn our meeting. All in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed, please say nay. It is now 8:41 p.m. and this meeting of the State Board of Education is adjourned. To the members of the public, thank you for joining us, and we will join you in a couple of weeks for our public meeting.
Good night, everybody.
Have a good night.
Bye.
Good night.